It all started at the beginning of the second year of school, when Yuyuta finally summoned all the courage in the world to ask his childhood friend and crush to go out with him. This girl named Mikiru had always been his friend since they were kids. However, before this confession, here was what happened a day before. So, that day, Yuyuta asked Mikiru if she was free so they could hang out as usual. However, Michiru told him she was hanging out with her friends, but she could make out time for his pathetic ass the following day. As the conversation was ongoing, two random ugly bozos noticed them talking. One of the bozos remarked that Michiru was a fine-ass chick and wondered what a hot chick was doing with the shrimp, hinting at Yuyuta. Yeah, but actually, we can't blame the dude because Michiru was an extremely hot chick, athletic, and highly intelligent. The true definition of the perfect school beauty. While our boy, on the other hand, was an ugly dwarf with 0 steez and a -1 million aura. The only thing he was good at was crafting the perfect story that was better than J.K. Rowling's. The one person who ever listened to his stories was Michiru, and oftentimes she would praise him for being an exceptional storyteller. With that said, Michiru apologized for not being able to hang out with him, and just then, a friend of hers called her so they could start going. So, before leaving, she gave him the peace sign and said she would see him the next day while our boy just stood there awkwardly like a hopeless simp. Later on, as Yuyuta walked home, he thought about how this Mikiru had been the driving force that powered his life. He could proudly call her his muse. But then, if he had to continue with life, he would have to put on his big boy pants and ask her to be his babe. On the other hand, Mikiru stared at Yuyuta from inside the school as he was leaving, and noticing the serious expression on his face, she wondered if it was really urgent he hung out with her. Meanwhile, as Yuyuta walked home, the street was unusually noisy. The reason was that it had been announced by the electronic signboard that the popular web novel Digital Masters had been adapted into a blockbuster movie. So, everyone was eagerly heading to the cinema to see the movie. Those who couldn't were still excited nonetheless because the latest chapter of Digimas had just been released. This was the country's favorite web novel. Meanwhile, our boy wasn't caught up in the whole frenzy. He was only concerned about how he was going to make his much-needed confession the next day. While lost in thought, he accidentally bumped into an ugly dude who was pissed and made a move to beat his ass for being so absent-minded. But the dude's chick calmed him down, telling him that finding their way to the cinema was more important than picking a fight with a useless loser. However, Yuyuta couldn't shake off the thought that even such an ugly dude with a face that was more disgusting than expired milk had a girlfriend. He felt life was unfairly cooking his ass. He immediately began to have flashbacks about how Michiru had enjoyed listening to his stories. She had always cheered him on and praised his work. So, even if they didn't look like the perfect couple, Yuyuta was confident that with how sweet and kind-hearted Michiru was, she would take his feelings seriously. Back to the present, after Yuyuta had just confessed his feelings, upon hearing his awkward confession, Michiru adjusted her legs, stared at him angrily in surprise, and then slammed her hands, asking why she would ever want to consider such a request, leaving Yuyuta stunned. She told him she was busy and all she wanted to do was read the latest chapter of her favorite web novel, Digimas. Yuyuta then asked if she would consider reading the book later, and at least give him a listening ear. Hearing this, Michiru's anger boiled to the max. She slammed her hand on the desk, asking why he would ever tell her to read her favorite web novel later. Not even if her mother was in a coma would she stop reading this novel. Yuyuta immediately felt dejected because he had put his heart and soul into making this confession the perfect one. He tried talking to her again, but this girl was far gone, immersing herself completely in reading the novel. After reading a little, she stood up and said she was going home to continue the rest of the chapter. In response, the simp desperately tried to get her to listen, but Michiru dismissed him, saying she still had an episode of the Digimas anime to watch and couldn't waste time on such nonsense. Yuyuta told her to at least give a thought to his confession, but the bitch turned her back to him and said nothing would still change because, for now, her heart belonged to Digimas, and his worthless virgin ass didn't stand a chance.
Damn!
In response, Yuyuta demanded she stop comparing him to a non-living thing because he was real and clappable. Mikiru then turned, giving him a demeaning look, asking if he was seriously trying to compare his pathetic turtle face to the brilliance of the great author of Digimas. After which, she turned angrily towards the direction of the door and warned him never to compare his Smeagol appearance with the great Kamamatsu. As those words left her mouth, Yuyuta was stunned and asked, with disbelief, if she hadn't realized all this time that he was actually Kamamatsu, the author of Digimas. In response, Mikiru yelled at him, calling him a delusional, desperate, ugly-ass liar, and then said there was no way in hell he was the author. Yuyuta tried convincing her, but she shut him down immediately and asked him to stop. She told him that even though they were friends, she would never forgive him if he insulted her favorite author one last time. At that moment, Yuyuta was frozen in space because he never believed that all the times she had praised Digimus in front of him, she was clueless that he was the author. So, he quickly dove into his bag and pulled out his laptop, showing her the manuscript of the latest chapter as proof. Even so, Mikiru told him it was a copy and paste work, and said she never believed he could go so low to do that just to make her accept his bull crap story. As she was about to leave, Yuyuta desperately grabbed her hands, begging her to believe him, but she smacked his scrawny hands and then yelled at him to cut it out already. She told him no matter how hard he tried to convince her, she would never believe, even in her wildest dream, that his pathetic short self was a best-selling author. After saying that, Mikiru told him cruelly that Kamamatsu would surely be 10 times smarter and more handsome than the cringe that was before her very eyes. After saying those words, she stormed out of the classroom, declaring that she would never forgive Yuyuta for mocking her favorite author, and demanded that he never speak to her again. At that point, Yuyuta felt dejected and miserable because the reason he was able to write such a big hit was all because of Mikiru's praise. He cried like a sissy because it hurt to finally realize that all her praises were for Digimus and not for him. Walking home from school that day, Yuyuta was heartbroken and frustrated. He couldn't get the image of Mikiru calling him a clown out of his head. With that, he took hold of his phone, and while staring at the latest chapter he just uploaded, he knew he wouldn't be able to continue writing. He might as well quit since his reason for writing was gone. He had no other reason to continue writing. With that, he typed the words, "I'm done, I quit, I'm retired." At that moment, the entire country was in a state of pandemonium as they couldn't believe that their most loved author, Kamamatsu, was retiring. For Yuyuta, however, he tried to smile because even though this was the end of Digimus, the novel had managed to be adapted into an anime and movie. So, it was indeed good enough. Suddenly, his phone rang, and it turned out to be his editor. As he picked up the call, all he could hear were rantings on the other end before the caller eventually declared they were coming over to his house. On getting home, his mother and sister unexpectedly lunged at him, demanding to know what the retirement post was all about. They asked if it was because he was getting bullied. But Yuyuta assured them he was fine and was not bullied. With that settled, they calmly demanded to know why he had made the sudden decision to quit writing. Yuyuta simply replied, telling them he had sadly lost the motivation to write. Hearing this, his sister, Yutako, started to throw tantrums, saying she would die if she couldn't read Digimus anymore. However, his mother gently pulled his enormous head to her chest balloons, patting it softly as she assured him that while she cherished his work, she loved him 1,000,000 times more. Yutako joined the embrace, and together, they promised to support his decision to stop writing. Suddenly, the door burst open, and his father rushed at him with tears in his eyes, demanding to know why he had given up. Apparently, if Yuyuta quit writing, then his father, who was the vice editor-in-chief, might get fired. His father mentioned that Yuyuta was his company treasure and begged him not to retire. But then Yuyuta's mom immediately grabbed him by the collar and ordered him to shut his worthless, filthy mouth and behave like a man for once in his pathetic existence. While this commotion was happening in the house, a bike pulled up just outside. The biker removed the helmet, and it turned out to be a hot baddie named Dara, who walked straight into the house and yelled at his father to leave Yuyuta alone. Seeing the hot stuff, Yuyuta was shocked, but Dara ordered him to hop on the bike immediately. Before Yuyuta could ask what was happening, Dara grabbed his hand, pulled him outside, and casually informed his parents that she would borrow him for a while. She turned to Yuyuta's father and told him that the company didn't trust him enough to handle the situation. Dara then handed Yuyuta a helmet and a jacket. After he put them on, she commanded him to hold onto her waist tightly. Hearing this, Yuyuta became nervous because he was a sore loser who had never touched a girl in his life. However, he managed to hold on to her jacket slightly, and with that, they zoomed off. Being so close to Dara on the bike, he could perceive the pleasant smell of her hair. Even though he shouldn't be turned on because his neutered eggplant just got rejected, somehow, he didn't feel so terribly anymore. Soon after, they arrived at a cafeteria, and Dara explained that it was the only place she could secure a reservation on such short notice. On entering the cafeteria, Yuyuta observed that the place was awkwardly empty, and then asked why they were the only ones there. Dara replied that she had booked the whole place for them alone because she needed to talk to him privately. She sat down at a table filled with food and then asked him to eat as much as he wanted. Just then, Yuyuta noticed that the table was filled with mostly meat and asked why. In response, Dara told him that according to her family motto, eating meat was the perfect solution for a depressed soul. She then tasted the meat and commented on how good the meat tasted even without adding the sauce. However, at that moment, she noticed that Yuyuta had barely touched his plate, hardly taking a single bite. She asked him what the matter was, and then cheekily remarked if a girl had broken his heart. Yuyuta immediately had a spit take at hearing this, so she figured she might have hit the bull's eyes at first shot. She asked him how it was possible for him to get his heart broken since he was a miserable loner who hardly went out with anyone. Yuyuta replied, telling her that the feeling was one-sided. With that, she asked if he wanted to talk about it. Honestly, Yuyuta hated anyone who pried in his business, considering the fact that this was even an embarrassing one at that. But seeing that Dara was a mature woman who seemed to have plenty of experience in breaking Sim's heart, Yuyuta decided to let down his guard this time. So, after explaining the issue of his childhood crush rejecting him, Yuyuta was shocked when Dara calmly smiled and told him she was glad. She mentioned that she was glad because, at the very least, it wasn't the stress of the work or the characters that made him quit writing. In response, Yuyuta told her he didn't have any reason to want to write anymore. Dara, however, pointed out that while it was true every writer needed a muse, what mattered even more was a writer's responsibility to their characters and the duty to see the story through to its conclusion. She told him that she wasn't saying this simply because she was his managing editor. On the contrary, she was saying it as a fan who had fallen in love with his characters. She then showed him Yuyuta her phone and then informed him that he had made the news. Yuyuta grabbed a hold of the phone, and while scrolling, he realized that just a few hours after he had posted his retirement, the post had gotten 60,000 replies begging him not to retire. He was almost in tears when he saw the massive love he was receiving from social media and how his large number of fans loved the characters he breathed to life. This hit him like an arrow straight to his heart because Digimus was supposed to be his child, and the world can't wait to see this child grow. In light of this new revelation, Yuyuta figured it would be irresponsible for him to leave his readers hanging and betray their trust just because of one stupid hoeing girl. Even though he loved it when Mikiru praised him, our boy finally put his brain cells to work and realized that, in the end, he kept writing because he loved creating stories. With a new resolve, Yuyuta told Dara that his mind was made up and that he would continue writing for the readers who loved his work and the characters who lived in it. He then thanked Dara for taking away the simp web that blinded his eyes and then pointed out the need to retract his statement. With that, he retracted his statement and was ready to start writing again with renewed motivation. Elsewhere, the heartless bitch, Mikiru, was delighted and relieved at seeing on her phone that her favorite author was back and better. At the same time, chicks all over the world were excited that Digimus wasn't cancelled after all. Hours later, after leaving the restaurant with Dara, who was entirely wasted from drinking too much wine due to excitement overload, they decided to board the train. While sitting inside the train, Dara showed Yuyuta just how many comments his retirement retraction post had made, which doubled the number of comments his initial retirement post did. Seeing this, Yuyuta was touched because, over the years, he never thought he was loved this much. Dara then mentioned that she was also one of the millions of people who loved him deeply. Hearing this, Yuyuta was both shocked and embarrassed, so he replied that the love she was referring to must be for his work. In response, Dara told him she was glad she had managed to achieve something and took a major load off her shoulders. She further explained that in this age of Amazon and Kindle, where authors could publish their work independently, it almost seemed like editors were no longer necessary. However, she assured Yuyuta that she was very useful to his work because, apart from being his editor, she remained the #1 fan of his work. Seeing her in this vulnerable state, Yuyuta couldn't help but notice that she looked even more beautiful when she was exposed and unguarded. Still in her feelings, Dara pointed out that her job was to understand him the most and working with him had been the best thing in her entire life. She told him she would love to be his partner for life, not just to partner with him in Digimus, but as a partner in everything. This statement nearly knocked Yuyuta's brain off his skull, and he felt totally embarrassed. However, he was glad she understood and supported him. At those words, Dara smiled excitedly but remarked that she felt jealous of Mikiru, who he had based his entire work solely on her praises and motivation. She added that any girl in the world would have their floodgates open just by being an inspiration to a bestseller. Hearing this, Yuyuta felt sad as he thought about how Mikiru had refused to believe he was Kamamatsu. Suddenly, Daru rested her head on his shoulders, which nearly sent Yuyuta to an early grave out of mere shock. What shocked him even more was when she asked if he would love to date her. Without hesitation, she placed her hands on his skinny thighs and leaned so uncomfortably close, and our boy climaxed from all things. She then asked if he knew the process of plot development and then began to rub her melons on his shoulders. At that point, Yuyuta didn't understand what the heck was going on with the girl. It didn't end there. Dara then revealed that the reason she hadn't shown him how much she wanted him before was because she had known he was interested in someone else. But now that the threat was gone, there was nothing holding her back. She gave him a cherry kiss on his cheeks and told him he was cute. And just then, Yuyuta almost shat ice blocks just from getting his first kiss on his cheeks. Some random ugly losers on the train began to take a video of the steamy scene going on, while others demanded they get a room already. Totally embarrassed, Yuyuta stood up faster than my dad left me and informed Dara that he had arrived at his bus stop and then immediately bolted out of the train. However, Dara couldn't help but watch him leave, gripping her short skirt with a flooded peach and then waving him goodbye. While walking home, Yuyuta assumed it must have been because Dara was drunk, and that was why she was acting so thirsty. Nevertheless, her motivation, support from his family, and the entire love he had received from his fans had given him the much-needed motivation to get home and write the damn next chapter. The following morning, Yuyuta woke exhausted, only to find Yutako sitting on his bed sobbing. He asked what the matter was, and she told him that she immediately became emotional after reading the latest chapter he had posted the night before. She informed him that even though he had posted late at night, the chapter had gotten a massive number of views. With so much excitement in her heart, she embraced him and then thanked him for blessing his fans with a new chapter. After getting dressed for school, Yuyuta headed downstairs for breakfast with the family. It was then that his worthless excuse of a father tackled him into a hug, thanking him for not quitting and getting his ass fired. The deadbeat father, while still hugging him, thanked him for being the family's financial savior. But Yuyuta's mom immediately separated the clinging octopus from her son before he squashed Yuyuta's fragile bones. She then asked the useless man to get his act together and provide for his family so that even if Yuyuta decided to quit writing, he could still be a provider. In response, the spineless old dweeb told her that anytime Yuyuta decided to quit writing, the family was as good as dead. However, the mother ignored the idiot and then hugged Yuyuta, assuring him that if he ever wanted to quit, the family would support his decision. She also urged him to take his studies seriously and encouraged him to live a normal life, assuring him not to worry about the family's finances. However, Yuyuta assured her that he was still passionate about writing and he wasn't going to quit anytime soon. Shortly, while having breakfast, they watched the news on TV about the retirement and retracement of the best-selling author that has caused passionate reactions all over the world. Hearing this, Yuyuta almost had a spit take because he had never expected his little post to gain so much publicity. His freak of a father then shouted like a crazy salesman, informing Yuyuta that Digimus was a massive franchise that had sold a crazy number of printed copies and anime Blu-ray. The old man also mentioned that the movie alone generated about $50 billion at the box office. After that, his father pointed out that there was going to be a party to celebrate and commemorate the $50 billion milestone. After saying that, he quickly rummaged through his bag and showed Yuyuta the invite to the party, shocking him. According to the invite, the party would be held at a luxurious 5-star hotel next to the Metropolitan Government Building. The old man also revealed an even more impressive shocker, stating that the production team would be booking the entire hotel for the event, instantly blowing everyone's mind. Following this, he asked Yuyuta if he would be attending the party. Yuyuta then thought deeply about the request. Even though he was trying to hide his identity from the general public, the bigger reason was that, initially, the moron had assumed that being around girls was like cheating on Mikiru. But with the ugly bitch out of the picture, it was time to have fun. With that, he told his father he would be attending the party as this would help him get over Mikiru for good. So, his father assured him that he was going to inform the crew about his coming. The old man also pointed out that Yuyuta would also get the privilege to see the super famous, super beautiful voice actress, Yuri, along with the rest of the cast at the party. That moment, Yuyuta instantly remembered that he had heard Yuri's amazing voice in the anime audition, and it had a deep, lasting impression on him. On the other hand, Yutako quickly googled Yuri's name, and when the search results showed, she was shocked to see that Yuri was a drop-dead gorgeous. For Yuyuta, however, this party would mark the beginning of a new chapter in his life. On the day of the Digima's party, our boy and his father arrived at the venue dressed in a new suit, like James Bond's rip-off. On getting inside the hotel, the clueless morons immediately got lost and couldn't find the exact hall for the event. So, his old man instructed him to wait while he asked for directions. 20 minutes had passed, and the old man was nowhere to be found. At this point, Yuyuta believed the old man had abandoned him just as your hairline abandoned you. As he was planning to find his way, he heard a sweet voice asking if he was stranded. He turned around and saw the most beautiful girl in all of manga history, and his DNA abandoned him also. The pretty girl asked if he was at the hotel for the Digima party, to which he stammered yes. She immediately noticed how tense Yuyuta was, so she asked him to chill since it seemed they should probably be the same age. She then asked if he was lost, to which Yuyuta responded yes. Yuyuta told her that his father had left to seek directions and had yet to return. In response, she revealed she was also lost and then asked if she could stay with him until his dad returned. Yuyuta nervously agreed, and as they waited, Yuyuta thought of several conversation starters, but he was too anxious to use any. After several minutes of awkward silence, the girl finally broke it by asking what his name was. Nervous as hell, Yuyuta introduced himself, after which the girl also introduced herself as Yuri. She then asked what relationship he had with Digimas to be at the party. That moment, Yuyuta considered telling her he was the freaking author of the bestseller, but he assumed the girl might not believe him anyways. However, before he could answer, Yuri asked him not to bother since the question was quite personal. Finally, after several weird moments, our boy spoke, asking if she was a fan of Digima, the web novel. Excitedly, Yuri exclaimed that she was the biggest fan ever and had been a fan ever since the first chapter was posted. Upon hearing this, Yuyuta was stunned because he never believed such a hot beauty would be his biggest fan. So, he inquired as to what she liked most about the novel. Yuri replied, telling him it was a long list. She explained that she was in love with the charming characters, the protagonist, and then went on to list several other things. Hearing all this, Yuyuta could tell that the girl was a die-hard otaku. He blushed because seeing such a hardcore fan apart from his family members meant a lot to him. With that, he told her he was glad to know she was a fan. But then it hit him. He was supposed to be pretending to be a fan, too. So, he rephrased his statement and told her the author would be delighted to have such a passionate fan. With that said, they ended up talking about Digimas for a while, as if they had known each other for years. After talking for hours, Yuri realized Yuyuta knew more about Digimas than she did and was happy to have found a die-hard fan like her. She told him she had never met anyone with whom she could open up about her love for Digimas and was happy she had lost her way and eventually met Yuyuta. Following that, Yuri revealed that it was because of fans like him that she gave a voiceover for the female lead actress in the anime. Hearing this, Yuyuta was stunned, and that was when he recalled his father talking about a certain beautiful voice actress. With that, he froze in shock to realize that Yuri was indeed the super beautiful, super popular voice actress his sister and father had talked about. Yuyuta was impressed that she was quite humble for someone so popular and couldn't help but ponder on the fact that he just had a casual conversation with a celebrity. On the other hand, Yuri then revealed that when the anime was announced, she had to practice day and night for her voice to be worthy of one of Sir Kamamatsu's characters. Hearing her call him, Sir creeped Yuyuta out. However, Yuri mentioned that it would be rude to address Kamamatsu without showing some respect. After this, Yuri asked for his contact info, and Yuyuta immediately aged 10 years after hearing this request. He shook his head in utter disbelief because he had never thought an actual girl would like him for his disgusting face rather than for being an author. He then asked why she needed his contact information, and Yuri explained that she would love to chat with him more about Digimas and that she felt he was a great guy. Yuyuta, on the other hand, still couldn't wrap his head around the fact that the girl was really interested in him. However, he told her he would love to chat with her and then gave her his contact info. Just then, his fugly-looking father, who stranded him, returned and then apologized for keeping the author himself waiting. That moment, Yuri was shocked when she heard the weird old man call Yuyuta author and wondered if she heard right. At the same time, the useless disappointment of a father, on seeing Yuri, was awestruck and began to act like a fanboy, asking for her autograph. However, Yuri was still concerned about the author's thing she just heard. So, she asked Yuyuta if he was truly Kamamatsu. In response, Yuyuta shyly told her yes, guilty as charged, and the girl fainted on the spot. They immediately tried reviving her, but her spirit was almost leaving for Nirvana. Meanwhile, at the lounge of the hotel, another hot blondie named Alyssa was walking to the event center when she accidentally heard someone mention Kamamatsu and felt something was just not right. In the next scene, Yuri was taken to the first aid room by Yuyuta's dad, while Yuta was led to the event hall by one of the ushers. Before leaving, Yuyuta's dad informed him that he would be called on stage as one of the surprise guests, shocking him. Several hours later, the party commenced, and the whole place was packed with guests and journalists. Our boy, however, was backstage with the random usher, nervously waiting to be called on stage as a special guest. As he looked out at the audience and saw everyone dressed in fancy clothes, a wave of stage fright hit him immediately. Shortly, the franchise director, Makoto, stepped on stage to address the audience. He said he would skip the lengthy formalities and go right into business. Makoto then gave a boring lecture about the success of Digima and how the hard work of the team had brought it to fruition. He raised his wine glass, saying the party was all about celebrating their hard work. After this, Makoto mentioned that he would bring a special guest to the stage. Upon hearing this, Yuyuta almost had a high PB because he assumed the special guest was him. However, he was shot in the head when Makoto called in Alyssa, and the crowd went wild with applause. Alyssa walked onto the stage, and seeing her, Yuyuta was mesmerized because he recognized Alyssa as the famous artist who sang the opening song for Digima's anime. What caught his attention most was her hourglass shape that could easily fit for a supermodel. At that moment, Alyssa sang the opening song and thrilled the audience with her amazing voice. After she was done, she bowed her head in appreciation, while the star-struck audience couldn't get enough of the amazing performance. Following Alyssa's wonder performance, Makoto announced to the audience that they had another very special guest in their midst. Yuyuta immediately became tensed, while the nosy usher, noticing how tensed he was, pushed him right onto the stage. As Yuyuta walked onto the stage, everyone wondered who the heck the ugly kid was. However, at that moment, Makoto smacked his back and then announced him as the creator of Digima, leaving the entire crowd in total disbelief that the legendary Kamamatsu was just a youngin, and an ugly one at that. Nevertheless, our boy stood awkwardly on the stage and bowed his head in greeting. Suddenly, Alyssa walked back to the stage, introduced herself, and then bowed to Yuyuta, saying she was deeply honored. At this point, Yuyuta was confused as to how he would react, but just then, he noticed drops of water on the floor and assumed it must be her floodgates leaking. Makoto also formally introduced Alyssa to Yuyuta as one of his biggest fans. Makoto then told Yuyuta that when Alyssa heard about the anime, she had called, offering to write the opening song. With that, Alyssa approached Yuyuta and shared how his spectacular story had deeply moved her, inspiring her to start writing songs. She suddenly grabbed his hands, throwing Yuyuta off balance, and told him that his work had changed her entire life. She added that she had always wanted to express her gratitude. Without hesitation, she immediately placed his hands on her heavenly pillows, asking if he could feel how fast her heart was beating due to how excited she was. But bro could feel more than her heart beating. He could also feel his wood rising.
What do you mean by that?
Following this, she told him that as a fellow creator, she respected him more than anyone in the world. In response, Yuyuta mentioned that he respected her also as an amazing singer. Upon hearing this, Alyssa was touched, so she embraced him out of the blues and pressed her bubbly chesticles against his lean chest. She pointed out that she had been dying to meet him for so long, and now that she was the happiest woman in the world. Yuyuta also thanked her for loving his work and for even going the extra mile to write a song about it. He added that it was indeed an honor to have met someone as wonderful as her. Before he could finish his statement, Alyssa told him she loved him. Surprisingly, she grabbed his head, leaned closer, and gave Yuyuta his first ever saliva exchange that fried his brain cells completely. After that, she told him that he was everything she needed, that she loved him deeply, and that she wanted to go out with him. Meanwhile, Yuyuta still couldn't believe that his first lip clapping was given to him freely by a famous singer, and because of that, his lips would need to be laminated. Just then, Makoto got onto the stage and scolded Alyssa for acting too thirsty on stage and for giving the young man all kinds of wet dreams. While this was ongoing, Yuri suddenly woke up in the first aid room and demanded to know where Yuyuta was. Yuyuta's father explained that Yuyuta was at the party, but Yuri could feel her heart beating fast and excited at the mere mention of Yuyuta's name. The kiss shared between Alyssa and Yuyuta and the unexpected confession became the highlight of the party. While everyone had refreshments, Yuyuta couldn't get the taste of the kiss off his lips. Suddenly, Alyssa approached him, bringing food and asking him to eat with her. Yuyuta told her she didn't have to go through all the trouble, but she insisted it was no trouble at all. Looking at the food, Yuyuta could tell it was the type of food a 5-star hotel would serve. Alyssa then took a bite, and from the expression on her face, Yuyuta could attest that she enjoyed every bit of it. However, Yuyuta couldn't help but continue to stare at her banging body and the things he could do with her body. Suddenly, Alyssa took a slice of the meat and offered to feed him. Yuyuta immediately froze at the spot and told her he didn't deserve the honor of being fed by her. However, this made Alyssa sad, thinking Yuyuta didn't like her enough to beat her meat. So, she immediately gave him the puppy eyes, and before he knew it, the simp found himself unable to resist, his mouth opening on its own, ready to be fed. After which, she leaned close, telling him she felt hot on the inside and would need his long ice pack inside her. Suddenly, Yuri showed up apologizing for missing Yuyuta on stage. However, with the intense kissing that happened on stage, Yuyuta was glad she had actually missed it. Just then, Alyssa grabbed Yuyuta by the hands to mark her territory. Out of jealousy, she began to drag him in the opposite direction so they could taste the variety of foods. However, Yuyuta asked her to chill and then turned, demanding to have a conversation with Yuri. So Alyssa mentioned that she would also stay behind for the conversation. With a smile, Yuri thanked Yuyuta for creating Digimas, saying reading the novel had always filled her with courage. In a dramatic move, she moved towards Yuri, telling him that whenever she was down, his work had always cheered her back up, while Alyssa continued to stare at her with disdain. At that moment, Yuri immediately grabbed Yuyuta's hands, pointing out that she had always been waiting for the day to thank him and was glad she had come for the event. However, in an attempt to move even closer, she tripped and collapsed on Yuyuta's body, pressing her portable milk jugs against his chest. But she apologized almost immediately, saying she got too excited while Alyssa stood beside them, angrily boiling with intense jealousy. Out of sheer desperation, Alyssa quickly separated them and then yelled at Yuri to know her place. Alyssa then grabbed Yuyuta's arm again and then angrily demanded to know who Yuri was to her boyfriend. Hearing this, Yuyuta was shocked because he wasn't aware that he had actually become anyone's boyfriend. Yuri, on the other hand, asked Yuyuta if he was dating Alyssa, but he denied it faster than I could come up with a new joke. Upon hearing this, Yuri was relieved, but Alyssa was still overheating with jealousy, causing her head to almost explode. So, Alyssa grabbed Yuyuta by the hands and hugged him tightly to show she was in charge. However, as the party ended, hearing words of gratitude from so many people left a deep impression on Yuyuta. The party made him realize that Mikiru's approval wasn't all he needed to be an amazing writer. Meanwhile, as Mikiru scrolled through her phone to update herself on the latest gist buzzing at the moment, she was stunned when she stumbled upon a picture post of a random girl with the legendary Kamamatsu. Even with the sticker on Kamamatsu's face in the picture, she could tell it was Yuyuta because of the shape of his enormous head. She immediately recalled the way she had treated Yuyuta that day she rejected him. That day, while Mikiru was outside the school, she heard Yuyuta cry a river over the rejection. But she felt no remorse whatsoever because she would never forgive anyone for making a joke about Kamamatsu. Back in the present, Mikiru pondered on the fact that it could be possible that Yuyuta was Kamamatsu. But then again, she still could not believe it and decided to get ice cream instead to clear her head from all the thoughts. Shortly after getting her favorite strawberry-flavored cone from the supermarket, she happily headed home. That was when she spotted a black van pulled over at Yuyuta's crib, and Yuyuta's father stepped out of the van. It felt unusual, so she decided to peep what was happening. Just then, she noticed Yuyuta stepping out of the van, also dressed in the suit and tie, and wondered what the short goofy ass was doing wearing such a lame-ass tie. She wondered what kind of event he would have gone with such a horrendous fashion. However, she remembered that since childhood, Yuyuta had always been dressing like a clown. With that, Mikiru laughed because Kamamatsu would never have such a horrible fashion sense. But then, she remembered the Instagram post of Kamamatsu where he was wearing a similar suit and tie. Suddenly, her eyes widened in shock when she saw Alyssa and Yuri step out of the van. She almost had a nervous breakdown wondering what in the world two famous celebrities were doing in the Yuyuta's crib. However, she assumed they must be impersonators because there was no way in hell Yuyuta could be friends with two celebrities. Meanwhile, Yuyuta demanded to know why his dad had decided to bring the ladies home at such a late hour. The father then asked the chicks if they would love to come into the house, and they eagerly accepted, saying it was the perfect chance for them to meet with their fans. At the same time, Mikiru started to panic because she could recall Yuyuta's dad once mentioning that Yuyuta was important to their publishing company. Her head was almost about to explode as she continued to wonder why the celebrities were in Yuyuta's home. Meanwhile, Yuyuta's mom stepped out of the house, and Alyssa quickly introduced herself. After the introduction, she said she would love to marry Yuyuta, leaving everyone in total shock, including Mikiru. Then, Yuri introduced herself and said that she would also love to call her mother in the future. Hearing all this, Mikiru couldn't believe her ears and thought she must be dreaming or something, or probably must have been ice-skate. At the same time, Yuyuta's mom then invited the girls into the house. She pointed out that if they were going to compete for the role of Yuyuta's wife, then it would be best if she judged both to find out who would be the best wife material. She told the chicks that they could also spend the night, which made the magnum-craving girls really excited. Yuyuta's dad, on the other hand, couldn't contain his joy. So, he hugged Yuyuta and thanked him for having a harem filled with celebrities who would call him father-in-law and daddy. But on hearing this, Yuyuta's mother called him a creep and delivered a stunning punch to his midsection to flatten his balls. Meanwhile, Mikiru wobbled back home in utter sadness and confusion. On getting home, she threw the ice cream she had bought to the ground and dived right into bed, soaking her pillow in tears. She couldn't shake the thought that Alyssa and Yuri were getting married to Yuyuta and was still confused as to why the celebrities showed Yuyuta so much affection. She then had an idea. She decided to check the Insta post once more and compare the tie Kamamatsu wore with the one Yuyuta was putting on. When she did, she was dumbfounded to realize it was the same horrible tie. However, she decided to sleep in order to discard the memories of all that had happened that night. But then she couldn't get a single sleep as her mind was still racing with the thought that she might have made the greatest mistake of her life. The following day, Mikiru arrived at school looking like a ghost suffering an addiction from not sleeping all night. She knew she had to investigate and get definitive proof that Kamamatsu and Yuyuta were not the same person. However, the problem was how she would talk with Yuyuta since she had shut him up in the cruelest of ways. As she walked to class, she noticed a bunch of girls talking to a blonde idiot about the upcoming inter-high sport. However, as she walked past them, she wondered why the girls were giving so much attention to the ugly douche who was delusional and assumed he was the MVP of the school. When the dude stared at her, she had chills and thought even Yuyuta was 100 times better than the freak. However, the girls then noticed that the dude was staring at Mikiru, so they casually remarked that Mikiru wasn't open to dating anyone because she was married to Digimas. Even so, the blonde face was certain Mikiru was the perfect match for him and was determined to bag her. On the other hand, while standing before her locker, Mikiru heard a voice behind her, and she immediately assumed Sugawa, the blonde dude, must have followed her. When she turned, she was shocked to find Yuyuta standing before her. For Mikiru, however, Digima had been a very special story to her. When her mom passed away and her dad moved overseas for his job, reading Digima was the only thing that took her mind off the pain. The conflicts and the entire plot resonated with her like it had been written for her alone. She saw Kamamatsu as her savior, and that was the very reason she wouldn't stand letting anyone insult him, not even Yuyuta, her childhood friend. So that morning, when Yuyuta greeted her, she pretended to be still pissed and reminded the simp that they were not on talking terms. However, she told him he could quickly say whatever he wanted to if it was really urgent. But deep down, she was indeed glad Yuyuta had talked to her first, because it would make finding out the truth easy. Just then, Yuyuta asked if she had done the homework. On hearing this, Mikiru remembered that she had been so engrossed with the whole Yuyuta and Kamamatsu thingy that she had totally forgotten about doing her homework. So, she immediately began to leave. But as she was leaving, Yuyuta noticed she was looking pale, so he asked if she was fine and suggested she go see the nurse. But Mikiru yelled at him, saying she didn't need to see anyone, and then she walked away. While walking, she thought about getting solid proof that Yuyuta was truly Kamamatsu, which was the only way to get the stupid worries out of her head. Later that morning, while in class, Mikiru thought about investigating why Alyssa and Yuri were in Yuyuta's home earlier. So she indirectly asked Yuyuta where he had gone over the weekend, lying that one of her neighbors had seen him wearing a suit. Yuyuta replied, telling her it had to do with his dad's work. According to the IG post, Mikiru knew there was a Digima's party last weekend, so it might be very well possible that Yuyuta had met Alyssa and Yuri at the party. However, the problem was why the chicks were hanging out with his ugly ass. So, to get answers, she pressed further, asking Yuyuta if he made any friends at the party. In response, Yuyuta smiled, telling her he did, which made Mikiru super jealous that Yuyuta was really happy he had met Alyssa and Yuri. However, she told him it was fine, but deep down this girl was dying from intense jealousy. Noticing this, Yuyuta asked if she was upset, and without giving the question a second thought, Mikiru shouted that she was. Suddenly, Yuyuta's phone beeped. He was surprised because he assumed his phone was on silent. However, Mikiru was still reeking of jealousy because she had concluded the message Yuyuta received was surely from the celebrity chicks, since she knew his family members wouldn't message him during school hours. Meanwhile, Yuyuta responded to the message, all smiling, which aggravated Mikiru even more, as he was having so much fun chatting with the girls. She could see him laugh over the stupid message, which infuriated her. That instant, she couldn't contain the anger anymore, so she angrily stood up from her chair and snatched the phone from Yuyuta, leaving him confused as to what was wrong with the crazy bitch. But then, she immediately became embarrassed because she knew she was behaving like a total nutcase and a jealous ex, so she returned the phone to him. During recess, Mikiru stayed in the restroom, thinking about how seeing Yuyuta talk with other girls made her sad. Just then, a group of chicks stormed into the restroom, asking if she was interested in starting a beauty YouTube channel with them. They told her a beauty like her would definitely rack in the views. However, Mikiru told them to get their ugly, worthless face out of her sight. She knew she had to focus on Yuyuta for now and then walked out of the restroom. As she walked to the class, she noticed a bunch of ugly-ass bitches gossiping about Yuyuta, calling him a shrimp and loner that would probably die a virgin. Hearing those harsh roastings, Mikiru instantly got angry because, as Yuyuta's childhood friend, she felt she was the only one allowed to trash talk him. Shortly afterwards, in the next class, Mikiru pretended to be reading but casually took sneaking glances at Yuyuta, which he noticed. Suddenly, Yuyuta's phone vibrated. It was a message from Alyssa saying she was looking forward to their meeting that evening. Yuyuta smiled and responded that he was also looking forward to meeting her. Seeing this, Mikiru muttered to herself angrily, asking why the idiot was flirting with a girl in class over the phone. But that instant, Mikiru received a hard, brain-resetting knock from the teacher for talking in class. As the teacher walked past, Yuyuta asked if her brain was still in good condition, but it only made her pissed even more because it was all his fault. At the end of school that day, Yuyuta grabbed his bag and was about to leave when Mikiru called out to him. She asked if he was heading home, and Yuyuta replied, telling her he was, but he already had plans for the day. However, Mikiru inquired if they could walk home together, but in her mind she assumed it was all for the investigation. In response, Yuyuta told her it was fine and was glad that despite all that had happened, they could still walk home together. As they walked, Mikiru held onto his hands tightly and gave him an awkward stare, which made Yuyuta really uncomfortable. But still, the certified simp was giddy all because he finally got to walk with his childhood crush again. But something seemed off. The scent of Michiru's perfume was different. The way she pressed her chest airbags against his arm, and her desperate stare left Yuyuta concerned. Curious, Yuyuta demanded to know why Michiru was staring at him like some toxic ex. In response, Michiru questioned if Yuyuta had a problem with her stare. But just then, Yuyuta, noticing danger, shouted for Mikiru to watch her step. Before Michiru could even react to the warning, her foot slipped on the staircase, sending the shorty tumbling down along with Yuyuta. They pancaked the ground, with Michiru landing atop Yuyuta, exposing her peach armor like a wardrobe malfunction begging to go viral on TikTok. However, with Michiru's heavy dump truck nearly crushing Yuyuta's twig waist, Yuyuta quickly urged her to get off, and then admitted he'd been binging her OnlyFans content the whole time. Hearing this, Michiru turned tomato red with embarrassment, so she promptly yeeted herself off him and started adjusting her skirt like that would erase the spicy history. But then, Yuyuta attempted an apology, explaining it wasn't intentional, but then fumbled by saying it wasn't a big deal since they'd seen each other privates when they used to bathe together as Rugrats. Irritated by his words, Michiru snapped, yelling at him to shut his bloated lip. Once outside the school, Yuyuta trailed behind Michiru, still apologizing for the mishap. But then his phone notified him of a message from Alyssa, saying she was waiting for him at the gate. While fixated on the text, Michiru tapped his shoulder nervously, pointing out that a buff man in black dupe was eyeballing them just at the school gate. Frightened for their safety, Michiru urged Yuyuta to leave the area before steroid agent Smith noticed them. Yuyuta nodded in agreement, and together, they hurriedly turned back toward the school. But at that instant, Hulk Light spotted them retreating and charged after them, terrifying Mikiru. They halted abruptly, and Yuyuta, eager to prove his alpha male status, stepped in front of Mikiru to shield her and then demanded to know why the Johnny Bravo was chasing them. Shockingly, the bouncer bowed respectfully, apologized for alarming them, and then revealed he was Alyssa's personal assistant, sent to fetch Yuyuta. Following that, Mr. Olympia guided Yuyuta and Mikiru to a sleek black limo straight out of Pimp My Ride and informed Yuyuta that Alyssa was chilling inside. Just then, the limo window rolled down, unveiling Alyssa, who asked Yuyuta if she could escort him home. Upon seeing Alyssa, Mikiru turned to ice block with her jaw dropped to the floor, while Yuyuta shyly confessed he hadn't expected Alyssa to arrive in some sick wheel. Wasting no time, the bouncer seized Yuyuta's scrawny paw and practically yeeted him toward the limo. Yet, Yuyuta paused, glancing a puppy dog look at Mikiru, and noticing his hesitation, Alyssa called out from inside, suggesting Yuyuta could bring the clingy side piece along if she was his girlfriend, stunning Mikiru completely. That was Michiru's breaking point. Embarrassed beyond words, Mikiru dashed off like a drama queen while crying and shouting that she didn't need the ride. Meanwhile, as Mikiru fled, Alyssa grabbed Yuyuta's hand and insisted they head to her place, leaving Yuyuta bewildered and shocked. On the other hand, as Mikiru hid behind an advert board, watching Yuyuta get whisked away in the limo couldn't help but feel a little salty. But suddenly, two ugly NPCs approached Michiru's hiding spot, asking why she was hiding like she just robbed a vending machine. Annoyed, Mikiru instantly recognized them as Sugawa and Abe, the LeBron James wannabes from the school basketball team. Sugawa, who had long been crushing on Mikiru, invited her to join other girls at their game. But Mikiru brushed him off, saying she would rather watch paint dry than snub them like expired milk. Meanwhile, upon reaching Alyssa's lavish apartment, Yuyuta marveled at its luxury like a broke dude in a Gucci store. Mesmerized, Yuyuta walked over to the window and was captivated by the stunning view of the city. But then, Alyssa interrupted his rich person daydreaming by announcing she had coffee ready, prompting Yuyuta to head to the dining area. As Yuyuta watched Alyssa pour the coffee, he couldn't fathom how an ugly gloomer like him was able to earn the attention of a fine baddie. While taking a sip of the coffee, Alyssa edged closer, making Yuyuta jump in shock like a spooked cat, and then she inquired if he liked her iced coffee. Yuyuta tried to answer, but Alyssa's pillowed chest scrambled his thoughts, leading him to blurt out how pretty and rich Alyssa was. Smiling, Alyssa countered that he was the real baller and then inquired to know how he managed his finances. Yuyuta explained that his mom handled his money, prompting Alyssa to admit she felt kinda jealous. Intrigued, Yuyuta asked if she lived alone in her fancy penthouse, to which Alyssa replied sadly that her assistant sometimes visited. Noticing how sad Alyssa was, Yuyuta figured that she must be having some daddy issues. But just then, Alyssa leaned forward and revealed that she had a bold request to ask of Yuyuta. Before Yuyuta could even ask what the request was, Alyssa shyly asked if Yuyuta could give her his autograph. Yuyuta was shocked at hearing this because his pervy gremlin mind had initially thought Alyssa's bold request was going to involve forcing herself on him like she did the last time. However, Yuyuta agreed to sign his autograph, which thrilled Alyssa beyond words. Quickly, she handed him her Digima's master's novel to sign, which Yuyuta signed faster than Usain Bolt running from a truck con and then returned it back. Getting that signed copy made Alyssa excited, so she held it close to her chest and declared that she would treasure it forever. Seeing her this happy made Yuyuta's heart melt, so he requested her autograph in return. Alyssa agreed, but since Yuyuta didn't bring anything special to get signed, he gave her a random piece of paper instead. Alyssa hurriedly scribbled on the paper like a girl on a sugar rush, but messed up and asked for another sheet, awkwardly admitting that she had never signed an autograph before because she was too shy. Looking a bit embarrassed, Alyssa confessed to Yuyuta that, though it may sound surprising, but she actually had zero social skills. Yuyuta, remembering how Alyssa had thrown herself at him during the Digima's party, was confused. So he asked how she could be shy when she literally performed live in front of a crowd. Alyssa explained that singing was different. When she performed, she just focused on the music and blocked everything else out. She also admitted that if she hadn't attended the Digima's party, she wouldn't have met him. However, while Alyssa spoke, Yuyuta zoned out like a bonehead, staring at her Digima's copy, and then he noticed that the edges were worn out, making him assume she must have read it a million times. He asked if she truly loved Digimas, to which Alyssa passionately confirmed, saying it was her whole world. But suddenly, Alyssa accidentally dropped the cup of coffee she held, causing the hot liquid to spill on her top. Panicking, Alyssa jumped up and ran to the bathroom, but just before disappearing inside, she turned around, locked eyes with Yuyuta, and, out of nowhere, asked if he wanted to shower with her, nearly crippling his senses. Seeing how frozen in shock Yuyuta was, Alyssa immediately apologized and clarified she was only pulling a prank on him. Then she encouraged him to explore her apartment while she had a brief shower. While Alyssa headed for the bathroom, Yuyuta paused momentarily, pondering if it was a red flag for a guy to snoop around a woman's privacy. But then, since Alyssa herself had invited him to look around, Yuyuta decided to go full MTV Cribs on her fancy apartment. While drooling over the decor of the fancy apartment, Yuyuta noticed an open door down the corridor. So, he quietly slipped into the room and, upon entering, realized it was Alyssa's music studio, where he then spotted loose sheets of musical notes scattered across the floor. Naturally, Yuyuta picked one of the musical sheets, but before he could even process the scribbles, Alyssa came charging into the room wrapped in nothing but a towel, yelling that the room was off limits. While Yuyuta just stared at her, shocked and lost for words to say, Alyssa pleaded with him not to look at the loose musical sheet because they embarrassed her. But when Yuyuta finally snapped out of staring at her, he quickly shouted an apology for gawking at Alyssa's unclad form. Alyssa, confused by his words, froze, and at that moment, she accidentally dropped her towel, flashing her B-cups and goodies in HD. Freaking out, Alyssa hastily tried to cover her Mima peanut brittle, but, feeling totally overwhelmed, the spineless virgin bolted faster than your deadbeat dad seeing baby you for the first time. Reaching the sitting room, Yuyuta sighed in relief, escaping the high blood pressure moment, though he still couldn't believe his virgin eyes had just glimpsed a hot chick's bare assets. A few hours later, Alyssa, now fully dressed, apologized to Yuyuta for giving him an uncensored view of her mini-plots. But Yuyuta reassured her that no apology was needed since any size made the wood rise. Alyssa blushed but still insisted that it was embarrassing that Yuyuta had to see her like that. Yuyuta then apologized for entering her studio, but Alyssa countered it wasn't his fault, but hers since she'd permitted him to explore and could have stashed her embarrassing musical sheets instead if she didn't want them seen. Alyssa then confessed that the sheets contained songs she was composing for Digima's second season. Hearing this, Yuyuta recalled that the second season had been announced days ago with no air date yet, so intrigued, Yuyuta asked why Alyssa was starting so early. Alyssa then explained that cooking up musical masterpieces took time, and she needed to get a head start. Impressed, Yuyuta admitted he hadn't realized how much effort Alyssa poured into making her banging songs. In response, Alyssa noted that her songs were meant to enhance the main project, so she took her time to create something satisfying. But then, suddenly, Alyssa started crying, saying that this was exactly why she didn't want Yuyuta to see her disgraceful unfinished work. However, Yuyuta comforted her, explaining he understood and felt privileged to peek into her creative process. Placing a hand on his chest, Yuyuta added that her unfinished songs brought him closer to her and assured her she had no reason to feel ashamed. Feeling slightly better, Alyssa asked if he wanted to hear the song, to which Yuyuta instantly agreed. With that, Alyssa then perched at the grand piano like a knockoff Alicia Keys and sang soulfully while stroking the keys. As Yuyuta listened to Alyssa voice the opening song out, every note and pitch evoked the Digima's world, leaving him awestruck. Once Alyssa wrapped up her America's Got Talent moment, Yuyuta praised her, declaring he loved every bit of the song and then thanked her for being talented, unlike most of the losers watching this video. Alyssa accepted his compliments gratefully, but then highlighted a major issue. She stated that she still hadn't come up with any good lyrics for the song. Furthermore, Alyssa stressed that her song needed to be worthy of Digima's, something the fans and even the author himself would approve of. Seeing how passionate Alyssa was about Digima's, Yuyuta wondered how he could assist her in any way. Determined, Yuyuta clenched his fist and then asked Alyssa if she needed help with anything. Yuyuta promised that, as Digima's author, they could brainstorm the opening song's lyrics together. Hearing this, Alyssa grew emotional and wept tears of joy. Surprised by her tears, Yuyuta asked what was wrong, and Alyssa confessed she'd never imagined in her wildest dream that she'd collaborate with her favorite author. However, Yuyuta calmly explained that since they were both working on the same franchise, they were more like colleagues. Yuyuta happily added that since they were working on achieving the same goals and visions, they were more like comrades and should be able to support each other in times of need. At those words, Alyssa, overwhelmed with emotion, lunged at Yuyuta and hugged him like a discount teddy bear, pressing tightly against him. Alyssa thanked Yuyuta for his help, tears streaming down as she vowed to give her best with his support. Meanwhile, later that night at Michiru's apartment, Michiru was just chilling, reading the latest Digimus chapter, when she spotted a spicy update from the author, Kamamatsu, stating he'd drop new chapters more frequently. But what truly made her soul leave her body was his reason. According to the author, he had met a hardworking creator who inspired him to step up his game. At that moment, Michiru's heart began to pound 1,000 beats per second, wondering if the hardworking creator the author was talking about was none other than Alyssa. At that point, Michiru began obsessing again over whether Yuyuta was truly Kamamatsu, but she quickly dismissed the thought, convinced there was no way a dork like Yuyuta could ever be the great Kamamatsu. Just then, the doorbell chimed, prompting Michiru to question who might visit at such a late hour. She approached the door and on peering through the peephole, she spotted Yuyuta's goofy mug face on the other side of the door. Michiru then opened the door and, with her hands crossed, smugly demanded to know what the walking forehead wanted. Yuyuta explained he had something for her and handed over a fancy gift bag. Apparently, this was an apology from Alyssa's Terminator for scaring her earlier at school. Intrigued, Michiru snatched the bag and peeked inside, only to find an insanely expensive tea, which she kept. Sensing the perfect opportunity to confirm if Yuyuta was really Kamamatsu, Michiru invited Yuyuta in, suggesting they try the fancy tea together. Yuyuta, after scratching his oversized melon of a head, hesitated before stepping inside. Once inside the apartment, Yuyuta apologized for ditching Michiru earlier to ride off with Alyssa, but Michiru, masking her inner saltiness, waved it off like it didn't matter. Michiru then set the freshly brewed tea on the table and asked if Yuyuta had spent the whole day with Alyssa. Yuyuta, clueless as a wet sock, cheerfully replied that they had coffee together and had a great time. Hearing this spiked Michiru's jealousy levels like a broken stock market. Trying to keep her cool, Mikiru asked if Yuyuta planned to hang out with Alyssa again. Yuyuta, all smiling, said they hadn't made any plans yet but mentioned he was meeting another friend on Saturday. This statement made Michiru's jealousy boil over, and in annoyance, she thrust a cup of tea at Yuyuta. Noticing her unease, Yuyuta asked if something was wrong, but Michiru lied through her teeth that she was fine. But in truth, the tsundere struggled to conceal her intense envy over Yuyuta spending quality time with other hoes. Curiosity overtook her, so unable to hold back, Michiru asked what time Yuyuta would meet his so-called friend on Saturday, and Yuyuta informed her it was set for 10 in the morning. Once Yuyuta left, Michiru slammed the door behind him, dying of anger at the fact that she had to sit and watch Yuyuta's stupid, happy face while he talked about hanging out with other girls. Worst of all, she failed to get any solid proof of Yuyuta being Kamamatsu, but she resolved to spy on him during his Saturday outing. Finally, Saturday arrived, and right at the Kawasaki station, Yuyuta was nervously clutching his phone, waiting for Yuri. When Yuri finally appeared, she apologized for two things, one for being late and the other for her toxic behavior towards Alyssa at the Digima's party earlier on. However, Yuyuta reassured Yuri that everything was fine and urged her not to overthink it. With a grin, Yuyuta joked that, if for anything, he should thank her for making the party more enjoyable for him. Then he encouraged Yuri not to dwell on it and pointed out they were there to have fun. Yuri conceded Yuyuta was right, then grabbed his hand and pulled him into the station, startling Yuyuta, who hadn't expected her to be so clingy. Inside the station, Yuri noticed Yuyuta seemed uneasy, so she asked if anything bothered him, to which Yuyuta replied, confessing that he was a depressed basement-dwelling nerd unused to going out with a girl. To comfort him, Yuri casually mentioned that Yuyuta was also the first guy she had ever gone out on a date with, making Yuyuta flustered. On getting to the main attraction of the station, they soon spotted a cinema and decided to watch a movie. Strolling down to the cinema, Yuri leaned close and whispered to Yuyuta's ears that they looked more like a couple, causing Yuyuta's brain almost to explode. Glancing at the day's movie list, Yuyuta asked Yuri if she had any movie in mind, and she pointed to the Digima's Master's movie, saying she'd love to see it. Yuri then asked if Yuyuta had a problem with her movie choice, to which Yuyuta said he was fine with it. Before Yuyuta could even reach for his wallet, Yuri sprinted off to buy the tickets herself. Yuyuta tried to stop her and offer money, but she waved him off like a billionaire sugar mummy. As Yuyuta stood there, he suddenly felt a strange sensation, like someone was watching him. But, brushing it off as paranoia, he focused on Yuri, who later returned with a drink and popcorn. She handed him his share and, seeing him hesitate, reminded him that she picked the movie, so it was only fair she covered the cost. Then, Yuri eagerly dragged Yuyuta toward the theater, and along the way, Yuyuta couldn't help but love how freely Yuri pulled him by the hand, and wished she could also pull his third stiff hand that way. Meanwhile, hiding in the shadows watching Yuyuta and Yuri was Mikiru in disguise. After seeing the Digimas movie, Yuyuta and Yuri grabbed lunch at a cafeteria, where Yuri raved about how emotional the movie was. Yuyuta, however, didn't get the hype, puzzled as to why people were clapping and crying like it was the Game of Thrones finale. But Yuri explained to the clueless goat that it was the way the Digimas fans showed their appreciation for his work. Yuri's words made sense, so Yuyuta told her that if the fans loved his work, they also appreciated the staff, like her, the talented voice actress. But just then, Yuyuta noticed two buffoons gawking at them awkwardly, which made him start to feel insecure, thinking the guys were probably wondering what a pretty chick like Yuri was doing hanging out with a big-headed blobfish like him. Yuri, noticing Yuyuta's unease, demanded to know what the matter was. In response, Yuyuta shyly admitted that he felt unworthy of being on a date with her, but Yuri quickly shut his filthy mouth and scolded him not to talk down on himself. Still, Yuyuta tried telling Yuri that she looked really stunning while he looked like a death row inmate. But before Yuyuta could finish his self-loathing statement, Yuri slammed the table and ordered him to stop with the negativity. Pointing at Yuyuta, Yuri advised Yuyuta, like some motivational speaker on Twitter, that if he kept talking down on himself, those words would shape his reality. She then urged him to be confident and claim he was the great Kamamatsu, with a net worth twice that of Elon Musk, to which Yuyuta sheepishly agreed. But just then, Mikiru, disguised and spying, accidentally bumped into their table. Concerned, Yuyuta headed to check if the mystery girl was okay, but that was when he noticed in surprise that it was Mikiru in some cheap disguise from Temu. Mikiru, terrified that her stalker gig might be blown, bolted out of the cafeteria faster than a caffeinated cheetah. But Yuyuta, certain it was Mikiru he'd seen, chased after her, yelling for her to wait. When Yuyuta finally caught up, Mikiru attempted a goofy act, altering her voice to sound like a deranged ape to throw Yuyuta off. Unfortunately, Yuyuta handed her the phone she'd left behind in her panic, leaving Mikiru no choice but to drop the act and take off her disguise. As Yuyuta interrogated Mikiru on why she was even at the cafeteria, Yuri rushed in, demanding to know why Yuyuta had abandoned her to chase after some random chick. With both girls now present, Yuyuta then introduced Mikiru to Yuri as his childhood friend. Thrilled to meet Yuyuta's old buddy, Yuri eagerly introduced herself, only to be met with Michiru's jealous ice-cold shoulder. Next, Yuri suggested Mikiru join them for lunch, and after staring at Mikiru warily, wondering if it was a good idea, Yuyuta eventually agreed. Mikiru, on the other hand, acting like she had better things to do, accepted anyway, claiming she was only gracing them with her divine presence because she had no choice. Turning to Yuri, Mikiru further mentioned she looked forward to chatting with her because she had a few questions. Deep down, Mikiru figured that although her cover was blown, she was still dead set on extracting one crucial piece of intel, whether Yuyuta was actually Kamamatsu. Upon returning to the cafe, the girls waited while Yuyuta handled the food for everyone. When Yuyuta returned with a meal, Yuri helped him with a tray and thanked him, but this sparked envy in Mikiru. Just then, Yuyuta casually mentioned he ordered Michiru's favorite dish exactly how she liked it. But Mikiru, already on edge, snapped at him, telling him not to get cocky. Observing their bickering, Yuri smirked, commenting how Yuyuta and Mikiru acted like an old married couple, and then admitted that it made her jelly. But Mikiru aggressively shut down any couple accusations, stating she'd rather dish out couple goals with a milkless cow than Yuyuta and his irrelevant face. Shifting the subject, Yuri asked how long they'd known each other, to which Yuyuta revealed they were basically born together. Yuyuta elaborated that they were born in the same hospital and had lived in the same neighborhood since childhood. Curious, Yuri leaned in and teased, asking if Mikiru had ever caught feelings for Yuyuta after all that time, to which Mikiru, without hesitation, declared she wouldn't even date the Dabi freak in a zombie apocalypse. Hearing this, Yuri countered, saying Yuyuta was kind-hearted and authentic, which only made Michiru's blood boil to 100 degrees. Smiling, Yuyuta thanked Yuri for the praise, and on seeing Yuyuta's ear-to-ear grin, Mikiru almost died of intense jealousy. Annoyed, Mikiru began insulting Yuri, calling her one of those desperate, pick-me girls who hit on every simp they meet. Offended, Yuri shouted back, clarifying she wasn't desperate, but only liked guys she genuinely cared about. Seeing the opportunity to settle her Kamamatsu hunch once and for all, Mikiru suggested a girl chat, and asked Yuyuta to leave. Once Yuyuta was out of earshot, Michiru turned to Yuri, demanding to know if she actually liked Yuyuta. Yuri, flipping the question back on her, asked if Michiru had a problem with it. Playing it cool, Michiru denied everything, insisting she only cared about Yuyuta's dating life as his childhood friend. Yuri, unbothered, admitted she admired Yuyuta for his kindness, completely baffling Michiru, who couldn't comprehend how anyone could find the Smeagol interesting. Curious, Michiru pressed Yuri to explain what she found special in the Lego head boy, and it was at that moment that Yuri finally unveiled the answer, revealing that Yuyuta's stories touched countless hearts and was even adapted into a movie. Upon hearing this, Michiru's heart nearly burst, but the real explosion came when Yuri finally let the cat out of the bag by revealing that Yuyuta was the brilliant author and creator of Digimas. At that bombshell, Michiru's head went 404. All she could process was how the puzzle pieces finally clicked into place. With her head bowed in despair, Michiru stood like a haunted spirit straight out of Jujutsu Kaisen and shuffled sadly out of the restaurant like a zombie, ignoring Yuri's calls asking where she was going. Much later, Yuyuta returned, and not finding Michiru, he asked Yuri where she'd gone. Yuri explained that Michiru had abruptly left the cafeteria, adding she might have said something to upset her. However, Yuyuta reassured Yuri that Michiru wasn't one to hold beef for too long and then promised to smooth things over with her later. Elsewhere, a gloomy Michiru sat alone, sulking, when two useless dweebs approached her, trying to riz her up with Discord pickup lines. However, she tuned them out, lost in the revelation that Yuyuta was Kamamatsu. At that instant, tears welled up as she realized she'd rejected the confession of the one person she loved more than anything. Meanwhile, Yuyuta and Yuri continued their date, and while browsing the latest Digima's issue, Yuyuta suddenly noticed Yuri had vanished. Turning around, he saw her chatting with a lost boy. Turns out, Yuri, trying to be a big sis, had dropped a legendary line from Digimas using Ryo, the lead female character's exact voice, leaving Yuyuta standing there like he'd just seen a glitch in the Matrix. Yuyuta then approached Yuri and the boy, and upon seeing him, Yuri briefly explained that the boy had been stranded and then sought Yuyuta's permission to search for his mom. However, Yuyuta insisted on tagging along in the hunt for the boy's mother, delighting both Yuri and the child. While scouring for the mom, Yuyuta couldn't shake off how impressed he was earlier on when he witnessed Yuri going to such lengths as using Ryo's voice just to comfort some random boy. Eventually, they located the boy's mother, and the thrilled child wasted no time loudly informing his mom that Yuri sounded just like Ryo from Digimas. But just then, everyone in the mall who'd heard the boy's claim began murmuring about whether Yuri was truly Digima's voice actress. The whispers grew louder as suspicions intensified, and realizing she might soon be mobbed by fans, Yuri swiftly grabbed Yuyuta's hand and bolted out of the mall like Jennifer Lopez dodging paparazzi asking about her 100th failed marriage. Once outside, Yuyuta, thrilled to have spent such a fun day with Yuri, quickly told her he'd had an amazing time. In response, Yuri retorted that she felt the same and then asked if he'd like to go on another date sometime. Overjoyed by her request, Yuyuta grinned and assured her he'd love another fun outing with her. Meanwhile, back at Michiru's, still depressed and sulking, she received a phone notification. Upon checking, she saw Kamamatsu's latest post on his page about enjoying a date with a friend, plunging her deeper into despair. This time around, Michiru hated the fact that Kamamatsu was Yuyuta of all people and regretted ever rejecting the fool when he literally handed her his heart on a silver platter. Michiru spent the entire weekend wrestling with how to face Yuyuta and even losing sleep over it. But by Monday, while heading to school, Michiru made up her mind that Yuyuta might be Kamamatsu, but at the end of the day, he was still just Yuyuta. On her way to school that morning, she ran into Yuyuta and asked if he'd walk with her, and though it was an odd request, Yuyuta agreed. Strolling side by side, Michiru felt jittery but tried staying composed by reminding herself that Yuyuta wasn't her type, though she couldn't shake the nerves and was about to lose her mind. Just then, Yuyuta noticed her face looked uglier than ever, leaned in close, and curiously asked what was wrong. This only heightened Michiru's anxiety, causing her to stumble to the ground and yell at Yuyuta, asking why his scarecrow face was all up in her space. Yuyuta apologized but pointed out that Michiru looked like she had survived death twice, prompting him to ask if the girl had a fever. In response, Michiru scrambled up and dashed to school, shouting she was perfectly fine. Later that morning in class, every student buzzed about the latest Digimas chapter just released while our boy dozed off like an exhausted sloth. Michiru, on the other hand, couldn't peel her eyes off Yuyuta, fixated on him. Lost in thought, Michiru marveled that, despite being Digima's great author, Yuyuta had managed to remain so humble and calm amid the franchise's hype. Suddenly, her three dumb, beauty-challenged friends snapped Michiru out of thinking, misreading the scene and assuming Michiru was busily simping over Sugawa. Michiru didn't even bother about their accusations of her lusting after Sugawa, knowing the girls were practically useless and clueless. But just then, one of them actually used her last two brain cells and realized Michiru was staring at Yuyuta, not Sugawa. Hearing this, Michiru blushed and immediately stood up dramatically from her seat, fiercely trying so hard to deny it. She went full Steve Harvey defense, insisting she'd never simped for a shrimp like Yuyuta, and her friends, after pondering, agreed, recalled Mikiru only hung out with the filthy goblin out of pity back then. They mocked Yuyuta, laughing hard, but hearing them roast Yuyuta harder than Sunday barbecue enraged Michiru, who stormed off, claiming she needed to pee. Inside the girls' restroom, gripping her head, Michiru tried once again to convince herself that Yuyuta was just some grimy troll she had tolerated in the past. But no matter how much she fought it, she still couldn't stop thinking about him. Her heart raced as she recalled Yuyuta was Kamamatsu, the same Kamamatsu whose story had uplifted her in her darkest times and always looked out for her. At that moment, Michiru questioned if she was being shallow, worse than a gold-digging IG tramp, for loving Yuyuta after learning he might be Kamamatsu. Suddenly, her phone pinged with a message. When she checked, it was Yuyuta, asking where she was since class was about to start. Not only that, but Yuyuta told her to go see the nurse if she wasn't feeling well, and even promised to take notes for her. Reading this, Michiru had a deep certainty in her heart that she had fallen head over heels in love with the nerd, and the last thing she wanted was for some random chick to snatch him away from her. Reflecting back on the past, Michiru remembered Yuyuta had always been kind to her in every single moment, and even when she had treated him worse than a toilet brush, the useless simp would simply laugh it off and forgive her. Whenever things were tough and she felt lonely, Yuyuta stayed by her side, fretting over her health, a habit that hadn't changed since childhood. Back then, she was dead sure she was the only baddie that made Yuyuta smile, but now there were other chicks competing for his attention. Perched cross-legged on the toilet seat in despair, Michiru pondered how to win Yuyuta back, but the issue was she'd rejected him, wounding him in the process. Yet, if she did nothing, those two thirsty hyenas, Yuri and Alyssa, could swipe Yuyuta like Swiper right out from under her nose. Just then, an idea struck Michiru. Knowing Yuri and Alyssa were newbies who had only met Yuyuta days ago, while she'd known him for nearly 2 decades, Michiru grew more resolute than ever. At that moment, she grabbed her phone and asked ChatGPT if she could confess to a guy after rejecting him, to which the quirky FI replied that a simp would always remain a simp. With this in mind, Michiru decided to text Yuyuta. Her first draft reeked of desperation, and since it was her first time confessing to a guy, she erased it. After composing another message asking Yuyuta on a date, Michiru felt nervous but mustered all her courage and hit send. Seconds later, she got a reply from Yuyuta saying he was relieved she was okay. Instantly, Michiru grew confused and anxious when no further message followed. As she stared anxiously at her phone screen, mortified and wondering if Yuyuta was ghosting her, a second message arrived. This time, Yuyuta apologized, stating he couldn't go out with her, leaving Michiru staring at her phone in horror. After school that day, Yuyuta met Michiru on the school rooftop and asked what urgent matter prompted her to summon him. Angrily, Michiru demanded he stop playing dumb and furiously pressed him to explain why he'd rejected her. Scratching his planet-sized head, Yuyuta admitted he'd first thought it was an April Fool's prank, never imagining she was serious. Infuriated, Michiru questioned why on earth he would ever assume her confession was a joke. Yuyuta then apologized for treating her like a clown and firmly reiterated he could no longer return her feelings, stunning Michiru. Nearly in tears, Michiru asked why he'd turn her down. Fuming, she argued she was offering Yuyuta exactly what he'd always wanted, and he should be over the moon. Yuyuta conceded he should be happy, but explained he just couldn't date her. Yuyuta added that, besides, Michiru had rejected him first, and he wondered why she'd suddenly done a 180 on her stance. In response, Michiru stated that she changed her mind because the circumstances had also changed, and she was supposed to be the only one he should care about. Yuyuta calmly replied, saying Michiru used to be the only one he cared about. She used to be his sole source of motivation, and his entire world revolved around her. But after she brutally dumped him like trash, he realized that he had been viewing life too narrowly. It was then he realized he had fans all over the world cheering him on all this time, and thanks to them, he had been able to recover and find a new, fresh drive. Bowing like a disciplined gentleman, Yuyuta apologized and boldly declared he couldn't date Michiru. After this bold rejection, Yuyuta turned to leave like a Chad, but Michiru swiftly grabbed his hand, urging him to wait. Desperately, she insisted he wasn't thinking straight and was just mad for payback over her past rejection. She promised to apologize 1,000,000 times if that's what he wanted and begged him to reconsider. However, Yuyuta clarified he wasn't angry or bothered by the past rejection anymore. Yet his answer remained unchanged. In a final frantic bid to change Yuyuta's mind, Michiru dropped to the ground, pleading for him to rethink. But sensing Yuyuta's resolve never to hit her honeypot, Michiru angrily shouted, calling Yuyuta an idiot and declaring he'd always be her baby boy. Now pissed to oblivion, Yuyuta yanked his hand free and sternly stated he was never her possession. For the first time, Michiru saw Yuyuta this furious, so she apologized and begged him not to hate her. Yuyuta replied he neither hated nor loved her, so dating was off the table. Then, softening, Yuyuta apologized for raising his voice and left Michiru on her knees, sobbing uncontrollably as if her world had shattered, wishing she could take the blue pill and rewind to the day Yuyuta had confessed in class. Crying harder than a child, Michiru knew it was too late and rude, doubting Yuyuta when he'd revealed he was Kamamatsu, foolishly rejecting his confession. Arriving home that day, Yuyuta felt like absolutely garbage for treating Michiru badly, even though she had deserved it. Still, Yuyuta was a bit remorseful for raging at her like that, considering she was still his friend, and decided it would be best if he apologized to her. Suddenly, his mom called up to Yuyuta from downstairs, announcing that his friends had just arrived. Curious about who these friends were, Yuyuta headed to the sitting room and discovered Alyssa and Yuri waiting there. Yuyuta's mom then welcomed the girls inside, but as soon as they stepped in, Yuyuta's goofy dad charged at them, simping shamelessly. But just then, Yuyuta's a mom sucker punched the disgraceful lunatic of a father to bring him back to his senses. Next, the mom directed Alyssa and Yuri to Yuyuta's room to have fun with Yuyuta's nut, promising not to interrupt their fun. When the girls stepped into Yuyuta's room, Yuyuta felt nervous to death, as no girl, living or dead, had ever entered his sacred space before. The girls praised how OCD neat his room was, so Yuyuta asked them to get comfortable. All of a sudden, Alyssa began crying, prompting Yuyuta to ask if she was experiencing a phase. Alyssa dramatically explained she was just emotional, thinking about how many sleepless nights he must have endured crafting his amazing stories. But Yuyuta immediately shut her up and clarified that he does sleep very well. Alyssa, out of nowhere, grabbed Yuyuta's hand and remarked that whenever she got to see an author who took their health seriously, she juiced up instantly. But Yuri, not having any of it, snapped that Alyssa needed to chill and stop begging for a pegging. However, Alyssa just shrugged, saying it was only natural that she acted that way. Yuyuta, meanwhile, noticed Yuri sitting there looking oddly quiet, so he asked what was wrong. Yuri hesitated before admitting it was her first time in a guy's room, and as she spoke, Yuyuta recalled that back at the mall, Yuri had also told him that he was the first guy she had ever gone on a date with. So, intrigued, Yuyuta demanded to know why Yuri didn't have any male friends despite her looking like a whole snack. Confidently, Yuri proudly declared she had never had a boyfriend in her life and that Yuyuta was officially her first close guy friend. Not wanting to be outshined, Alyssa also jumped in and loudly announced that Yuyuta would also be the first guy in her life. A bit embarrassed, Yuyuta told the girls to ease up on the hype. But before he could finish his statement, Alyssa leaned in close and whispered he'd also win an award for being the first guy to see her cookie jar, nearly sending Yuyuta to an early grave. Shortly after, Yuyuta's mom brought tea, and as they sipped, Alyssa informed Yuyuta that she'd finally finished the opening song she'd struggled with. Then, she edged closer and asked Yuyuta to visit her place again, so she could thank him properly by doing all sorts of questionable things. Before Yuyuta could respond, Yuri cut in, showing him a book she'd found in his room. As Yuri flipped through the pages of the book, Yuyuta informed her that the book contained short stories he had written back when he was very young. Yuyuta further explained that he used to write stories by hand, then before his father bought him an old PC. While reading the short stories written in the book, Yuri suddenly started to tear up, leading Yuyuta to cluelessly ask if his chicken scratch handwriting was to blame. However, Yuri clarified that she was crying because the story was indeed touching. Just then, Alyssa snatched the book and declared she also wanted in on the emotional roller coaster. Yuri mentioned to Yuyuta that the short stories were as good as J.K. Rowling's or even better, to which Yuyuta replied, revealing he had written the stories back when he was still in elementary school. Shocked at hearing this, Yuri told Yuyuta that the stories were as good as Digima's, and before she could complete her statement, Alyssa chimed in, saying she was finding it hard to believe that Yuyuta had written such a masterpiece when he was still flexing diapers. Wasting no time, both girls unexpectedly moved an inch close to kissing Yuyuta and excitedly urged him to share the masterpiece with the world by posting it on Amazon. They doubled down, saying Yuyuta could upload it that very moment, claiming his fans all over the world would love it. Seeing how serious the girls were, Yuyuta had no choice but to agree, making the girls overly excited, but he warned that he would have to type it on his laptop first. The girls suggested Yuyuta could type it anytime he was free, but the nerd claimed it was just 50,000 characters, and he could type it all down within an hour. Doubtful, they asked if he really remembered everything word for word, to which Yuyuta replied, saying he had a very good memory and could remember all he had written in the past. With the girls eager, Yuyuta moved over to his laptop and then started slapping on the keys at inhuman speed like some crazed hacker from dark web on a deadline, leaving the girls both shocked and desperately in need of his finger. Exactly an hour later, Yuyuta announced he was done, and the stories were officially uploaded. After reading them for the third time, the girls got emotional all over again, hyping him up and declaring that this masterpiece needed an anime adaptation or a full-blown Hollywood movie. Smiling, Yuyuta appreciated their enthusiasm, but noted that his editor always warned him that the pro-novel world was a brutal battlefield. But then, Yuri suddenly exclaimed that Yuyuta's story post had already racked up thousands of comments and reviews. Yuyuta immediately checked his screen, only to find his story exploding online in mere minutes. Meanwhile, elsewhere, in Hotel Room 306, Dara, sipping on soda and scrolling through her laptop, smirked. She had just finished reading Yuyuta's latest story, and judging by her expression, she was impressed. Later that evening, at Yuyuta's place, Alyssa and Yuri prepared to leave, but Yuyuta's mom insisted they stay for dinner. While dinner graced the table, Yuyuta's loony dad sat tied up like a hog, restrained to keep the shameful waist of a man from humping the guests. Just then, Yuyuta's sister, Yutako, burst in from basketball practice and, upon entering, raved about Yuyuta's newly uploaded stories. As Yutako joined them at the table, she told Yuyuta that his short story was so heart-touching it left her entire basketball team squad crying like they binged Titanic on a loop. Curious, Yuyuta asked if young girls were even allowed to read web novels, to which his bound father explained that, thanks to Digima's success, Kamamatsu's works delighted fans of all ages, including young girls. Not pausing, his loser dad also suggested Yuyuta check the novelist rankings, and joined by Yuri, Yuyuta did so, only to be stunned to see his recent short story hit #1 with a staggering 300,000 ranking. With that, Yuyuta's dad enlightened them that with such a score, there was no way Yuyuta's story would not be adapted into an anime. The old-tied man further inquired to know if Yuyuta had been sent offers for a serialization from other publishing companies, to which Yuri answered on Yuyuta's behalf that he got 100 offers from companies seeking a manga version of the story. But Yuyuta's dad smugly declared it was too bad for those publishers because his company would be the one handling the gig. Next, the dad asked Yuyuta if Dara had reached out yet, to which Yuyuta confirmed she had. But before the dad could spiral into more nonsense, Yuyuta's mom shut him down with a death glare, threatening to leave him ball-less if he continued talking. Meanwhile, as they ate, Yutako asked if Yuyuta planned to keep writing the series. Yuyuta admitted he wasn't sure, explaining that his short stories came from deep emotions, and since he'd written them as a kid, he wasn't sure he could tap back into that mindset. Hearing this, his dad and the girls, shocked and dismayed, pleaded in unison for Yuyuta to continue the series. Yuri and Alyssa stressed how thrilling the story was and were eager to read more. Alyssa even added that, as a fellow creator, she felt it was too good to stop there. Yutako chimed in right after, exclaiming her club and his fans worldwide would crave more too. But before the issue could escalate, Yuyuta's mom clapped her hands like a teacher silencing a rowdy class and offered Alyssa and Yuri a sleepover, which they accepted without hesitation. As Yutako and the girls rushed off to set up futons in the guest room, Yuyuta's mom asked Yuyuta to help with the dishes. While scrubbing, Yuyuta, still deep in his feelings, asked his mom if he should keep writing. With a wise smile, she told him to do it only if he truly wanted to. reminding him that his writing was his own and shouldn't be controlled by anyone else's expectations. With that, she encouraged him to think it over, promising to support him no matter what. So, that entire evening, Yuyuta reflected on how everyone had rallied around him after Michiru's soul-crushing rejection pushed him to quit writing. Their encouragement fueled his resolve to keep going and determined to repay them. He first sent a reply to Dara's message, and then he dove into crafting more short story chapters. Meanwhile, that night at Michiru's crib, her room was gloomy and filled with more sadness that would last the Grinch for a lifetime. Just then, her phone notification pinged, revealing Kamamatsu had posted a new chapter, but Michiru felt too down to check it. She recalled the past when her mom passed away, and her father had abandoned her because the shape of her head reminded him of his math teacher. Kamamatsu's stories had once been her only comfort, but now, knowing they were Yuyuta's raw thoughts, she was scared. If there was even a hint of bitterness towards her in his words, it would destroy her. So, she avoided reading it altogether. Elsewhere, in a dark room, Sugawa was taking pettiness to Olympic levels, hurling darts at a picture of Michiru like she owed him money. Reclining in his chair, Sugawa vowed to make Michiru his, just for the satisfaction of watching her tough girl act crumble. Very early the next day, Dara arrived at Yuyuta's apartment to discuss his new novel. As they exchanged greetings at the door, Dara spotted Yuri and Alyssa's shoes and pondered why 2 pairs of female shoes were in the house. Yuyuta tried to explain but fumbled like a nervous virgin, though his mom, quick on her feet, saved him like an OG in the game, claiming the shoes were her old ones. With that resolved, Yuyuta's mom ushered Dara into the sitting room for coffee, and as they walked, she whispered to Yuyuta that she'd keep his other girls upstairs. While sipping coffee, Dara rambled on about how Yuyuta's recent novel outshone Digima's, captivating readers worldwide. Skeptical, Yuyuta suggested it might be an overstatement to compare it to Digima's. But Dara countered sharply, pulling up the yearly novel rankings for Yuyuta to see. Yuyuta was shocked to see that the novel he published just a day ago was topping the yearly ranking. Dara elaborated that it had racked up more points in a day than most anime-worthy novels earned in a year. She added that the points mirrored reader satisfaction and the lofty expectations for the author. Next, Dara asked if Yuyuta could carve out time to visit the editorial department. Curious, Yuyuta inquired to know if there was some kind of special meeting, to which Dara flirtingly revealed that it wasn't really a special meeting, but it was equally important. Yuyuta pressed if it concerned Digima's, and Dara finally spilt that it was an anime offer for his new novel. Noticing Yuyuta's stunned reaction, Dara explained that her company had a pretty good record with animes, so it was pretty easy to get the ball rolling. Intrigued, Yuyuta argued that even Digima's got an anime offer only after the novel started selling, to which Dara countered that with Yuyuta being the greatest hit of the century, it was easy to get an anime that would surely surpass expectations. Sensing hesitation, Dara asked if Yuyuta was against an anime adaptation. Yuyuta admitted he was thrilled about it, though deep down, he was worried about his confidence to sustain the series. Seeing his doubt, Dara urged Yuyuta to be more confident and to trust himself. Yuyuta's mom also chimed in with her own encouragement. Dara then promised the full backing of her editorial team and anime staff, while his mom echoed her support and that of others. Motivated by these words, Yuyuta felt relieved and resolved to push forward with the series. Meanwhile, Yutako, eavesdropping behind the door, decided to share the hot gossip with Alyssa and Yuri. Sometime later, as Dara prepared to leave, she reminded Yuyuta to drop by the editorial office as discussed. But just then, Alyssa and Yuri burst out, startling Dara. Acting like a jealous corporate girlfriend, Dara demanded to know why the girls were at Yuyuta's place. Wasting no time, Dara went borderline wild, grabbing Yuyuta by the neck and shaking him like a weak dummy, insisting on an explanation. But just then, Alyssa walked into their midst, breaking Yuyuta free from Dara's grip, and then introduced herself as Alyssa Ajamatsu, using Yuyuta's last name. Yuyuta froze in shock at Alyssa's claim, but the surprises kept coming as Yuri also introduced herself to Dara with Yuyuta's surname, sending him into a tailspin. Following that, Alyssa and Yuri swarmed Yuyuta, pressing him to explain who Dara was and what relationship he had with her. Before Yuyuta could say a single word, Dara strolled forward, calmly took Yuyuta's arm, and boldly declared herself his wife, flooring Alyssa and Yuri. After that slick power play, Dara announced she was taking her leave and then blew the girls' kisses, solidifying her superior gameplay. After arguing for hours with Yuyuta concerning what just happened, Alyssa and Yuri finally took their leave and then thanked Yuyuta's mom for being the perfect example of a mother-in-law. A few days later, Yuyuta stood before the editorial office to meet Dara about the anime. Unexpectedly, Alyssa and Yuri somehow tagged along, summoned by Dara for unrelated but important matters. As Yuyuta and the girls neared the building's entrance, they spotted a buzzing crowd blocking the way. Amid the buzzing crowd stood a celebrity everyone dubbed Prince. Suddenly, this prince locked eyes with Yuyuta in the crowd and called him his rival. While Alyssa and Yuri stood puzzled, wondering why this guy labeled Yuyuta a rival, the wannabe Brad Pitt strutted toward him, oozing arrogance. Upon reaching Yuyuta, the girls demanded to know who this smug jerk was, and before Yuyuta could bother with an intro, the paperbag face declared himself Prince Hakuba, a light novel author. Together, they all stepped into the company, and while riding the escalator, Alyssa and Yuri, intrigued, asked Yuyuta if Hakuna was truly the hotshot author he boasted of being. Overhearing this, Hakuna spun around dramatically, shouting if the girls hadn't heard of him. Wasting no time, Hakuna thrust a copy of his bestseller into their hands, urging them to burn his hot face in their brains. Yuyuta, clearly a fan of Hakuna's work, explained to the girls that Hakuna was the son of the CEO of the nation's top pharmaceutical company and a renowned writer. Yuyuta also added that even Dara admired Hakuna's work, and Hakuna had penned one of the era's best-known fantasy novels. Excitedly, Yuyuta declared he was among Hakuna's biggest fans, but upon hearing this, Hakuna surprisingly slumped into depression, lamenting that praise from Yuyuta felt more sarcastic than uplifting. Hakuna admitted that while it was an honor to be praised by an author of Yuyuta's caliber, his own achievements were like pig vomit next to Yuyuta's Digima's triumphs. With his once proud shoulders now sagging like a granny's chesticles, Hakuna glumly confessed that he felt like the world's biggest loser beside Yuyuta, and then admitted Yuyuta was a superior writer than he could ever be. Then, flipping his mood like some dumped stoner chick, Hakuna vowed that as long as Yuyuta led the race, his own fire would never die out. With a smirk, Hakuna assured Yuyuta that if he kept charging ahead, he would pursue him like a vengeful Psycho X until he surpassed him one day. Shifting topics, Hakuna asked if Yuyuta's visit to the editorial office was related to his Digima's anime, to which Yuyuta revealed he'd come to discuss an anime adaptation for his new novel, Offer Heart. Instantly, Hakuna sank into despair again, baffled that a work Yuyuta uploaded just a few days ago had already snagged an anime deal. Overcome with defeat, Hakuna crumpled to the floor, still reeling in disbelief that Yuyuta's unreleased novel would be getting an anime. Yuyuta tried consoling him, but Hakuna, wallowing in his emotions, lamented how Yuyuta, a young prodigy, had 2 anime adaptations while he, a middle-aged veteran, had barely secured his second after so many years. After an unnecessary amount of floor time, Hakuba finally pulled himself together and proclaimed he wouldn't let this discourage him. Instead, he was thrilled that his second anime was finally happening. Elated, Yuyuta, ever the fanboy, said he couldn't wait to buy it and asked for the title, to which Hakuna replied it was Bahamut Slayers. Watching this hilariously dysfunctional rivalry unfold, Alyssa and Yuri couldn't help but comment that at least their beef wasn't as toxic as Ronaldo versus Messi. With that, Hakuba bid them farewell, and as he walked off, Alyssa and Yuri turned to Yuyuta, teasing him for being such an adorable fanboy. But Yuyuta, too flustered, begged them to stop. Just then, Yuyuta's dad, suited up like a sane man for once, approached Yuyuta and the girls, acting polished, and briefly told them Dara was tied up in a meeting, so they'd wait in the meeting room. As Yuyuta's dad walked off, the Yuyuta and the girls headed to the meeting room, and upon stepping inside, they met the long hairy-looking troll, Mita, who greeted them warmly. Leaning close to Yuyuta, Mita praised Offer Heart as the best thing since sliced bread, adding it was an honor to direct it into an anime. While Yuyuta chatted with Mita, Dara burst in, looking like 50 dudes ran a train on her hot mess, and then apologized for keeping Yuyuta and the girls waiting. She also thanked Yuri and Alyssa for accepting her invitation, and then apologized for teasing them over the weekend by mentioning that she was Yuyuta's waifu. With that cleared, Dara grabbed a marker, declared they'd dive into business without further waste of time, and then scribbled words on the whiteboard. Standing before the board like a hot teacher, Dara announced the company planned a promotional anime episode for Offer Heart's first volume. Mita jumped in, revealing the promo would feature voice actors, and Dara noted it'd be a 15-minute episode posted on their website. As the team listened intently, Mita assured Yuyuta that the same team that turned his first work, Digimas, into an anime better than solo leveling would also help in transforming off her heart into a masterpiece too. After the briefing, Alyssa and Yuri asked why Dara had summoned them. Dara then explained their roles. Alyssa would craft an epic song for the anime, and Yuri would voice the lead character. Instantly, the girls lit up with excitement, thanked Dara for the chance and vowed to give it their all. Mita also pledged not to slack, promising Yuyuta the best anime he'd ever see. Dara joined the trend, assuring Yuyuta he could rely on her to share his stories globally. Seeing everyone pledge their best, like beta simps trying to woo a girl, Yuyuta felt overwhelmed with emotion. He told them he was the happiest author alive and promised to keep writing incredible stories. Meanwhile, inside a high-rise building, Sugawa captivated the crowd with his voice, while Mikiru, somehow at the club, sat alone, still sulking. Noticing Sugawa's side eye on her, Mikiru grew annoyed, wondering why the Justin Biebers want to be kept staring. One of her friends slid closer and asked what was wrong, noting they'd thought the club would cheer her up. The friend added they'd been worried sick when Mikiru skipped school for days and then urged her to open up to them. However, instead of spilling, Mikiru stood and said she needed to use the restroom. Seeing her head to the restroom, Sugawa ditched the simping girls around him, smirked and announced he, too, needed the restroom. While secluded in the restroom, Mikiru reflected on how attending the club was a terrible idea, expecting it to clear her mind, but instead ending up with more regret. After thinking about Yuyuta and wishing she could just flush away the mistakes she made, Mikiru stepped out of the restroom and found Sugawa lurking outside, waiting for her. Irked by the sight of the cocky fool, Mikiru moved to leave before Sugawa suddenly asked if she enjoyed his singing. Sugawa disclosed that he'd been serenading Mikiru earlier. Yet before Sugawa could say more, Mikiru dismissed him like premium trash and turned to leave. Suddenly, Sugawa, feeling disrespected, seized her hand and insisted Mikiru should feel honored he was even speaking to her. Mikiru wrestled to break loose, but Sugawa, under the delusion that he was the main character, coolly remarked that he liked his women feisty. Next, Sugawa asked if she liked him, to which Mikiru, alarmed, retorted she'd never like a repulsive arrogant creep like him. Hearing this, Sugawa claimed he'd caught Mikiru gazing at him passionately back in class, unable to take her seductive eyes off him. Mikiru, flabbergasted, realized the second-rate Casanova was talking about the time she was actually staring at Yuyuta. So, she attempted to clarify to the dense fool that he'd misjudged everything, and she didn't care about him one bit. In response, Sugawa pressed her to reveal who she'd been staring at, if not him, but Mikiru clammed up, unable to form a clear reply. Sugawa shrugged, saying he was fine with it all, just that he wanted Mikiru as his girl. Exasperated, Mikiru snapped, saying she'd never be his woman and tugged to free herself from his hold. But at that very moment, Sugawa pinned Mikiru to the wall, urging her to confess her true feelings for him. Savoring the struggle, Sugawa noted he didn't mind her being aggressive with him. As Sugawa's hand inched below Michiru's soft melons, Sugawa commented that Mikiru had the face and curves he craved in a girl. Now terrified, Mikiru smacked his puffy face so hard it should have come with a sound effect and vowed she'd never be his, even if he were the last guy on earth. Eventually, Mikiru wrenched free from Sugawa's grasp, and as she stormed off, Sugawa called after her, questioning why she'd sent mixed signals if she knew she wasn't into him. Just as Mikiru exited, Sugawa's crew began teasing him, branding him a ball-less femboy for failing to do the easiest thing, which was to rizz up a girl. This enraged Sugawa beyond measure, so he stepped up, dialed a number, and instructed the person on the line to execute the plan, promising to send a photo of the girl to target. Shortly after, one of Michiru's friends ran into Sugawa and asked if he'd seen her. Sugawa admitted he'd encountered Mikiru but capped that she looked pale, so he'd suggested she head home. Noticing the friend's unease, Sugawa offered to sing her a song and assured her he'd definitely check on Michiru's safe arrival afterwards. Meanwhile, Mikiru, trudging home, regretted ever stepping foot in that club. Little did she know, two bad guys in an alley were comparing her face to the photo Sugawa had sent. Once they confirmed Mikiru was the mark, they closed in, but Mikiru, already exhausted, tried to ignore their clapped faces and keep walking. But one of them grabbed her arm and suggested they have some fun. Mikiru screamed, trying to free herself from the dude's tight grip, but the guy just tightened even harder. Seeing how intent the jerks were to give her the D slowly, Mikiru grew utterly petrified, her screams fading. Just then, her phone buzzed in her bag, a call from friends checking in. but she couldn't answer, tears brimming. Fortunately, Yuyuta swooped in like a Walmart Spider-Man, declaring he'd been searching everywhere for Michiru. Without delay, Yuyuta, brimming with the confidence of a drunk man, pried Michiru from the thug's hold, took her hand, and began leading her away while the wannabe gangsters yelled, demanding to know who the heck Yuyuta thought he was to have such mad confidence. Hearing this, Yuyuta felt both jittery and furious, so he wheeled around, announced he was Michiru's childhood friend, and challenged the bandana punks if they had an issue with it. Terrified, Michiru asked Yuyuta why he was there, to which Yuyuta calmly replied that it was just mere luck before whispering for her to play along. Meanwhile, the goons, amused at seeing the tiny little hero, demanded that Yuyuta scram and never interfere when adults were talking. Nevertheless, Yuyuta stood his ground, firmly insisting he wasn't going anywhere until he took Michiru to her father. Consequently, the hoodlums grew pissed at Yuyuta's persistent annoyance and were about to chop off his PP until a stern voice coughed in the background, abruptly interrupting them. Frozen in shock, the goons' stunned faces revealed it was none other than Randy Savage, who sternly demanded to know what the Lankies wanted from his daughter. Immediately, Yuyuta, trying his best to play it cool, quickly assured him that everything was fine. Of course, that was part of the plan. But the goons, the moment they laid eyes on the human wrecking ball, their spines turned to jelly. Without a second thought, they bolted like scared roaches, screaming about how they didn't want to die. With the thugs gone, Yuyuta turned to Michiru and gently asked if she was okay. Still shaking, Michiru could hardly say anything, and noticing her trembling, Alyssa's bouncer clearly stated that he was glad she wasn't hurt. At that very moment, Michiru's eyes widened in shock as she recalled that the buff guy was the same macho who had come to pick Yuyuta up from school earlier. Following the incident, John Cena rip-off led Yuyuta and Michiru to the black limo and insisted that Michiru get in to rest. Likewise, Yuyuta urged her to go ahead, so Michiru reluctantly entered the limo. Inside, Yuyuta asked if she was now feeling better, to which Michiru replied that she was before thanking him for being her knight in shining armor. Still curious, Michiru demanded to know how Yuyuta had found her, and Yuyuta, all smiling, revealed that they were waiting at a red light when he heard her voice as she screamed for help. Feeling remorseful, Michiru asked Yuyuta why he chose to save her after she had treated him less than human. In response, Yuyuta smiled and said they were still friends after all, a response that left Michiru in total shock. At that moment, memories flooded Michiru's mind of how back then Yuyuta had always been there to help her. Indeed, it had nothing to do with whether Yuyuta was Kamamatsu or not. The boy had always been by her side and had never changed. Overwhelmed with emotions, Michiru started to tear up, apologizing for being a two-timing gold digger. However, Yuyuta told her not to cry anymore about it because he had already gotten over it. Eventually, Michiru calmed down, and while staring at Yuyuta, she felt grateful that he actually made her feel better without rubbing it in, further proof that she loved him. Just then, the limo's divider slid down, revealing Alyssa and Yuri, who had been inside the car all along. Seeing them, Michiru couldn't believe they were right there listening to her emotional moment with Yuyuta. Quickly, Yuri apologized to Michiru for interrupting her heartfelt moment, while Alyssa just kept mute. Next, Yuyuta asked Alyssa if she could give Michiru a lift home, to which Alyssa agreed instantly. Soon after, Alyssa and Yuri began to praise Yuyuta for his heroic moment, making him blush, so he tried shifting all the praise to Alyssa's bodyguard. Throughout the length of the ride, Alyssa and Yuri were quite considerate about how they spoke and even tried to lighten the mood. Meanwhile, Michiru, trying not to cry again, sent a message to her friends, who were still having fun at the club, letting them know she was fine and would soon arrive home safely. Overjoyed, her dumb friends announced the news at the table where they sat, catching the ears of one of Sugawa's homies, who wasted no time ratting it out to Sugawa. Realizing Michiru was unharmed, Sugawa grew infuriated and immediately put a call across to the useless hoodlums he had hired for the job. But when he demanded to know why they had failed to deal with Michiru, the thugs yelled, asking him never to contact them for any job again before hanging up, which infuriated Sugawa to no end. A few days later, at the editorial office, Yuyuta met up with Dara once again for a briefing on the ongoing Off Heart project. First, Dara informed him that the first volume of Off Heart was in printing. Then she commended Yuyuta for how fast he had worked, typing 350 pages of the book in just 3 days. Surprised, Yuyuta asked if he was really that fast, to which Dara, with a dumbfounded look, told him that it took other authors at least a month to type such a volume. With that out of the way, Dara informed Yuyuta that for his new novel, they would need the services of an illustrator for the visuals. Furthermore, Dara assured him that the success of the novel would depend on how nice the illustrations were. Next, she asked if Yuyuta had any illustrator in mind that the company could hire for the gig. Scratching his head, Yuyuta replied that he had no one in mind. Dara pointed out that she actually had a candidate in mind. With a serious expression, Dara asked Yuyuta if he had ever heard of Misama, to which Yuyuta mentioned that he hadn't heard the name before. To clarify, Dara explained that this Misama was a VTuber and illustrator with over 2 million subscribers on her YouTube page. Still, Yuyuta let her know that he hadn't heard of the girl, prompting Dara to ask if Yuyuta was actually a Gen Z or perhaps lived under the rock with the boomers. Laughing, Yuyuta apologized for being clueless and then told Dara that if Misama was as good as she claimed, the girl would have no time to work with them. But Dara countered almost immediately, informing him that it was actually Misama who had shown interest in working with them. Additionally, Dara mentioned that Misama had written a passionate pitch to be hired, and in her pitch, she made it clear that she was a huge fan of Yuyuta's work. Dara then showed Yuyuta an illustration that Misama had willingly created for Offer Heart, and upon seeing how beautifully drawn the character designs were, Yuyuta was utterly fascinated. He never believed that a famous illustrator would be willing to join his team, and for that, he felt deeply grateful. Next, Dara asked Yuyuta for his final decision on whether they should hire the girl, to which Yuyuta excitedly declared that he would love to work with Misama. The following weekend, at the train station, Yuyuta had planned a face-to-face meeting with Misama, but soon began feeling he'd made a mistake by choosing the train station as the rendezvous since it was usually jam-packed with people on weekends. Consequently, he decided the cafe would be a better meeting point and promptly messaged Misama to inform her of the change in location. However, Yuyuta was shocked when he received an instant reply from Misama stating she would be waiting for him at the cafe. Days ago, after the announcement was released about the novelization of Offer Heart, Twitter erupted in excitement, and the entire world eagerly anticipated the greatest collaboration between the best author and a godly artist. Shortly afterwards, in the present, Yuyuta received a message from Misama requesting to meet up, and considering how passionate the girl had been about the project, Yuyuta felt that meeting her was the least he could do. While making his way to the cafe, Yuyuta turned and noticed a short, emo-looking Barbie who seemed lost. Caught up in the moment, he observed her silver hair, blue eyes, and odd fashion sense. Additionally, he noticed that the girl might be asking for directions but couldn't communicate well with those she approached. So, once again, our boy decided to play Prince Charming and approached her, asking if she was okay or perhaps lost. However, the strange girl immediately became scared upon seeing his football-shaped head and horror face, retreating in fear. But just then, Yuyuta noticed she used a Digima's phone pouch, so he asked her if she liked Digimas, to which the girl responded by nodding like a lizard. Yuyuta tried to step closer again, but the girl only retreated further in fear. To calm her spiking nerves, Yuyuta assured her that he also liked Digimas and their characters, which worked like magic and eased the tense girl. With the tension subsided, Yuyuta asked where she was heading so he could assist her. The girl showed him a picture on her phone, which Yuyuta recognized as the north exit of the cafe, and he mentioned that, coincidentally, he was heading in that direction too. Hearing this, the girl's face lit up, and Yuyuta promised to accompany her to the location. On their way to the cafe, Yuyuta inquired why she was going there and if she intended to meet someone. Yet, the mysterious girl only responded by nodding her head multiple times. Hoping he wasn't keeping Misama waiting, Yuyuta checked his phone for any messages from her, but realized he hadn't received any DMs. As they continued their seemingly endless journey to the cafe, they encountered a crosswalk, and then Yuyuta noticed the girl stood frozen in fear, unable to cross, which reminded him of how Mikiru used to be terrified of crosswalks when they were little. So, just as he used to help Mikiru, Yuyuta grabbed the girl's hand, promising to stay with her all the way, which made her blush excitedly. With that, they crossed successfully, and shortly afterwards, they arrived at the cafe. Upon entering, Yuyuta asked the girl if she could spot the person she was supposed to meet, to which she simply kept bowing her head for no apparent reason. Being the nice guy he was, Yuyuta decided to stick with her until she met up with whoever she was there to see. At first, the girl seemed excited, but suddenly, she shook her head, indicating she didn't want Yuyuta to wait with her. Sensing her desire for him to leave, Yuyuta agreed to step away but promised to stay nearby in case she needed help. Yuyuta then moved forward, checking his DMs for any word from Misama, while the girl stood there blushing intensely. Next, Yuyuta texted Misama, informing her he had arrived at the cafe, and instantly received a reply saying she was also there, standing at the entrance. When Yuyuta looked toward the entrance, the only person he saw was the imma-dressed midget he had helped. Confused, he decided to ask Misama what she was wearing, but just as he began typing the message, the quirky girl, nearly hugging the floor, bumped into him, though Yuyuta caught her just in time to prevent her from hitting the ground. In that awkward moment, her phone smashed onto the floor, so Yuyuta bent down to help her pick it up. However, that's when he was stunned to see his conversation with Misama on her screen. Yuyuta asked the socially awkward girl if she was, by any chance, Misama, and upon hearing this, the girl finally spoke, asking if Yuyuta was Kamamatsu, to which Yuyuta replied yes. Overjoyed, Misama couldn't contain her excitement, shouting at the top of her voice as if she'd unlocked the secret to immortality. While sipping coffee, Yuyuta still couldn't believe that the girl he had generously helped was none other than Misama, the famous VTuber and illustrator. At the same time, Misama couldn't believe her luck that the kind Mr. Nice Guy who had assisted her was her favorite author, Kamamatsu. Unable to contain her excitement any longer, Misama shouted, attempting to announce that she was in love with her favorite author, though no one could understand a word she said. Just then, Yuyuta properly introduced himself by sharing his real name with Misama, and in return, an overjoyed Misama typed her full name on her phone and showed it to him. With a warm smile, Yuyuta complimented her, saying her name was cute, and hearing this praise nearly gave the awestruck girl a heart attack. Instantly, her face turned tomato red, so she asked Yuyuta not to be too formal with her. Hearing this request made Yuyuta smile, and upon seeing his smile, Misama lost her composure once again. Next, Yuyuta complimented Misama for being an illustrator and VTuber at such a young age. He revealed to her that when he was as young as she appeared, he was still learning how to write. But when Misama disclosed that she was an old soul in a youthful body, Yuyuta was shocked beyond belief. After that surprising revelation, however, Yuyuta complimented her on how incredible she was and expressed his admiration for the beauty of her artwork. Specifically, Yuyuta shared his excitement about how she captured character expressions and how beautifully she designed the cover page. Furthermore, Yuyuta conveyed his joy at the prospect of working with someone as talented as her. Hearing all these praises from Yuyuta caused Misama's heart to pound rapidly, and in an attempt to steady herself, she accidentally knocked over the cup of tea on the table, spilling the liquid onto her hand. Immediately, Yuyuta grabbed her hand and cleaned off the tea with his handkerchief, but his kind gesture only worsened the situation, as the overwhelmed girl suddenly fainted from sheer excitement. 10 minutes later, when Misama finally regained consciousness, they were able to discuss Digimus and offer heart at last. This time, they managed to understand each other, even if just a little. As it grew late, Yuyuta suggested it might be best to head home, but Misama mentioned she wanted to go shopping instead. Pointing out her struggle with directions, Misama begged Yuyuta to accompany her to the mall, to which he agreed, thrilling her even more. Upon arriving at the mall, they headed to the merch area, and when Misama spotted an array of Digima's merchandise on display, she rushed excitedly to grab one. She picked up a Digima's acrylic keychain, and seeing how much she liked it, Yuyuta offered to pay for it and presented it to her as a gift. Left speechless by the gesture, Misama didn't understand Yuyuta's reason for the gift. However, Yuyuta explained that he bought it to show his appreciation for her choosing to work with him. Flushed with emotion upon hearing this, Misama jumped happily and vowed to cherish the gift for the rest of her life. After shopping, they decided to part ways, and before leaving, Yuyuta asked Misama to reach out if she needed his input on the illustrations. Misama assured him she would and then admitted she'd had so much fun spending time with him. In a heartfelt moment, Misama confessed to Yuyuta that she had always been timid around people, but she was glad she'd taken the bold step to meet him, and was even happier to have connected with him in person. Tentatively, she asked if they could hang out again, and when Yuyuta didn't respond immediately, she hugged him out of nowhere, declaring that she loved him. Instantly, the scene turned awkward as everyone stared at them, so Misama quickly pulled away from the hug, grabbed Yuyuta's hand, and vowed to draw better than Picasso for his novel. After that, they bid each other farewell, both delighted to have met and hopeful they could achieve great things together. Several months later, at Yuyuta's home, Alyssa, Yuri, and Misama all visited simultaneously, and upon seeing the pretty chicks, Yuyuta's dad went into a frenzy once again. this time grabbing his son by the neck and thanking him for being the sole reason stunning celebrities graced their home. Not stopping there, the ecstatic dad hugged Yuyuta tightly, declaring his joy at raising a harem protagonist while the girls stood watching in horror. However, before the man could go completely overboard, his fierce wife appeared behind him, smacked him hard, and tied him up like a sacrificial lamb. Afterwards, she apologized to the girls for her husband's pervy behavior and, in the process, introduced herself to Misama. Just then, Yutako burst into the house and, after greeting Alyssa and Yuri, noticed Misama. Curious, she teased Yuyuta, asking why 3 girls were in the house and if he planned a steamy session with them. Yuyuta explained that Misama was the famous illustrator for his new novel, Offer Heart. As for why the girls were there, Yuyuta clarified that they had come to watch the newly released promotional video for Offer Heart together. Thanks to Dara, Yuri, Misama, Mita, and Alyssa, the promo episode was finally complete. Next, Yuyuta's mom suggested they all head to the living room to watch the video together. Upon reaching the living room, they surrounded the TV like football fans eager to catch the show. But before they could start, Yuri decided to properly introduce herself to Misama, and Alyssa followed suit. However, being sandwiched by the voice of the main character and the lead singer of Digimas left Misama feeling so shy she nearly peed herself. To make matters worse, Yuri complimented Misama on being so talented and cute, then suddenly hugged her passionately out of nowhere. This gesture overwhelmed Misama, causing her to wriggle out of the hug and plop down onto Yuyuta's lap. Instantly, Yuyuta froze, while Alyssa and Yuri, witnessing this, wished they could do the same. So, they both rose from their seats and sat close to Yuyuta on the floor, asking if they could also rest their backsides on him. But just then, Misama shot them a territorial glare, signaling that sitting on Yuyuta's thighs was reserved for her alone, shocking Alyssa and Yuri, who had always assumed Misama was an innocent little thing. At that moment, they realized that though Misama was small in stature, she had the cunning of a retired OnlyFans actress. Following that, everyone settled in to watch the promo video, and as it played, Yuyuta was captivated by its stunning scenery and charming characters. He could see the characters he'd created moving beautifully on the screen before him and felt immense gratitude toward everyone involved in the project. Misama had given his characters form. Yuri had breathed soul into them with her amazing voiceover, and, as the cherry on top, Alyssa had crafted a song that perfectly matched the plot's tone. Initially, Yuyuta recalled feeling nervous about the project, but with the help of everyone in the room, his creation had come to life. Just as the short film ended and the credits began to roll, Yuyuta turned to find, surprisingly, everyone in tears. Yutako, sobbing profusely, hugged Yuyuta and announced that the Offer Heart anime was even more touching than Digima's. Then, his mother chimed in, telling Yuyuta he must be the happiest boy in the world to have people create something so incredible for him. In a gesture of appreciation, Yuyuta thanked the girls for the effort they'd poured into the work, but the girls countered that they should be the ones thanking him. Yuri then thanked Yuyuta for running into her that day. Alyssa added her gratitude for his beautiful stories she could read, and Misama joined in, thanking Yuyuta from the bottom of her heart. Suddenly, Yuyuta's dad, still tied to a chair, screamed, assuring Yuyuta he'd do everything possible to ensure the anime received the best marketing ever. However, his wife didn't believe a word of it, assuming the fool just wanted Yuyuta to bring home more hot girls to simp over. Undeterred, the dad insisted he truly meant it, and would give his all to the anime's marketing. Would Yuyuta's recent novel turned anime be more popular than Digima's? Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content like this. As always, thanks for watching.